It started with boredom, really. That's the thing about night shifts. They stretch on endlessly, especially when you're the only one there. 4 years working as a network security specialist for a mid-sized tech firm in London, and I still hadn't adjusted to the isolation. The office building near empty, just me and the occasional security guard making their rounds. The job itself wasn't difficult. Monitor systems, patch vulnerabilities, document any unusual traffic. By 2 a.m., I typically finished the actual work, leaving hours to fill before my shift ended. Most nights I'd read tech blogs or work on side projects. Sometimes I'd watch Netflix with the volume low, one eye on the security monitors. It was during one of these mind-numbing shifts that my life changed completely. Even now, I can't sleep properly. The doctor says it's stress-related insomnia, prescribes Zopiclone that does nothing but leave a metallic taste in my mouth. How could I tell him the real reason? That every time I close my eyes, I see what I saw that night, that I'm afraid of who I'm becoming. My colleague Jamie first mentioned the dark web to me during a shift change. He wasn't suggesting anything illegal, just talking about how fascinating it was from a technical perspective, the way people had created this entire shadow internet. Being in network security, I understood the mechanisms better than most, but I'd never actually explored it myself. Jamie described forums where people discussed everything from political dissidents to black market pharmaceuticals. He made it sound like an anthropological study, observing human behavior when anonymity was guaranteed. That night, I downloaded Tor, just to see what the fuss was about. The first few weeks, I just browsed, mostly mundane stuff, forums for people discussing drugs, some marketplaces selling counterfeit goods, political message boards. Nothing you couldn't find on the regular internet, really, just with more paranoia and worse user interfaces. I was almost disappointed. Where was this digital underworld I'd heard about? Then I found a forum called Viewing Gallery. The description claimed it was for discussing real footage that the mainstream won't show you. I figured it was probably just conspiracy theorists sharing grainy UFO videos or something equally benign. I was wrong. The forum was divided into categories, each more disturbing than the last. War footage, industrial accidents, medical procedures gone wrong. Things I wished I could unsee, but found myself morbidly unable to look away from. One category was simply labeled rooms. I clicked it and found dozens of threads with cryptic titles like December Session Number 4 or Jakarta Special Viewing. The discussions beneath were vague but enthusiastic, with users thanking the hosts and requesting specific scenarios for future events. I didn't understand at first. Then I saw a comment. When's the next live show? Last one was cut short when subject expired too quickly. That's when I realized what I was looking at. Red rooms, supposedly live streams of torture or murder that viewers could watch or even direct. I'd always assumed they were an urban legend, something that conspiracy theorists and paranoid parents warned about, but that didn't actually exist. The technical challenges alone seemed insurmountable. How could you stream something like that securely without getting caught? I should have closed the browser. I should have walked away. Instead, I clicked on a pinned thread labeled Verification Process. The post explained that new viewers needed to be vetted before gaining access to live streams. There was a complicated process involving cryptocurrency payments and identity verification. Not your real identity, of course, but proof that you were a consistent persona and not law enforcement. I told myself I was just curious about the technical aspects. How were they maintaining security? What kind of streaming setup could handle this without being traceable? Professional curiosity. That's what I called it, as I created a dedicated persona and began the verification process. It took 3 weeks. Bitcoin transfers to anonymous wallets, answers to increasingly disturbing hypothetical questions, references from existing members. I found someone willing to vouch for me in exchange for helping them with some network security issues. Each step giving me plenty of opportunities to back out, to realize what I was doing. But by then, I was too invested. I kept telling myself I would just look once, to confirm whether these rooms were real, and then I'd report everything to the National Crime Agency. The first live stream I gained access to was scheduled for 3 a.m. on a Tuesday. I requested the night shift at work, knowing I'd be alone with secure internet access. As the designated time approached, a private message appeared with a one-time link. The message included instructions: no recording software, no screenshots, viewing limited to 45 minutes. I clicked the link. The video quality wasn't great, deliberately degraded, I assumed, to hide identifying details. The room was sparse: concrete floor, white walls, a drain in the center, bright, clinical lighting, a metal table with restraints. It looked almost like a film set, too clean and deliberate to be real. A figure entered the frame wearing a plain mask that covered their entire head. They moved with casual confidence, adjusting the camera slightly before stepping away. Text appeared in a chat window beside the video. Welcome to tonight's viewing. 14 participants confirmed. Subject will arrive momentarily. Standard rules apply. My heart was pounding. This couldn't be real. It had to be staged, some kind of extreme performance art or a very convincing simulation. Then the subject was brought in. I won't describe that person in detail. I can't. Even now, months later, I can barely bring myself to acknowledge what I saw, what I watched, what I didn't stop. The host addressed the camera occasionally, responding to requests in the chat. I didn't type anything. I couldn't move. I just stared, telling myself this elaborate hoax would reveal itself any moment. It never did. 27 minutes in, I closed the browser and vomited into my bin. I deleted Tor, ran security scrubs on my computer, and spent the rest of my shift shaking in my chair. I told myself I would report it in the morning. I would find a way to anonymously tip off the NCA or Interpol, someone who could trace the stream and stop these people. I didn't, because I wasn't sure I could report it without implicating myself, because a small, terrible part of me wasn't completely convinced it was real, because most shamefully, I was afraid. 2 days later, I received an email to my personal account, the one not connected to my dark web activities. It contained a single line. Did you enjoy the show? Your attendance was noted. I changed my email, my mobile number, eventually my flat. I found a new job across the country. I tell myself they were just trying to scare me, that they can't really track me to my real identity. But sometimes my new laptop camera, light turns on by itself, just for a few seconds before going dark again. My IT knowledge tells me it's probably just a software glitch. My nightmares tell me something else. I know they're watching me now. I've become the subject in a different kind of room. Sometimes, late at night, I think I hear breathing on the other end of my phone line. Or I'll catch a glimpse of someone with a familiar way of moving, standing too still at the edge of a crowd. I've installed security cameras, extra locks, a VPN. I sleep with a cricket bat beside my bed. None of it helps, because I know what I did. I know what I saw and didn't stop. I know what's out there now, hiding in plain sight behind proxy servers and encrypted connections. Here's the thing about the dark web that no one tells you. Once you've really seen it, it never stops seeing you. I've written this as a warning, though I doubt it will make a difference. Curiosity is too powerful. That's why those rooms exist in the first place, because there will always be people who want to see, who need to witness the worst things humans can do to each other. I understand now that the viewers are as much a part of those rooms as the people wearing masks. Last week, I received a small package at my new address, the one no one is supposed to know. Inside was a plain white mask and a note with an IP address, an invitation. They're offering me a different seat this time, a promotion of sorts. I threw the mask away, burned the note, but I know the choice isn't really gone. It sits with me in my flat each night as I check and recheck the logs. It follows me to work, to Tesco, everywhere I go. The worst part isn't the fear. It's the tiny voice in the back of my mind, the one that wonders what it would be like on the other side of the camera. The voice that's been there all along, perhaps, just waiting for permission to speak. I've started locking my kitchen knives in a safe. I catch myself researching remote locations, properties with cellars, soundproofing materials. I close the browser each time, horrified at myself, but the searches become more frequent, more detailed. When my neighbor played his music too loudly last week, I found myself thinking not about asking him to turn it down, but about how no one would hear anything from his flat if the music was always that loud. I stood outside his door for 30 minutes before walking away, trembling and sick with myself. I don't know if what I saw that night changed me or revealed something that was always there. I don't know if I'm being hunted or recruited or both. I'm writing this now because I need someone to know, to understand what these places do to a person. The forums call it the viewer effect. The theory is that watching changes your brain chemistry permanently. I think it's simpler than that. I think watching makes you complicit. It makes you one of them. And once you're one of them, there's no going back to who you were before. Yesterday, I found myself in Curry's examining camera equipment, high-definition models with excellent low-light performance. The shop assistant asked what I was planning to film. I didn't have an answer. I left without buying anything, but I know I'll go back, or find another shop, or order online using one of the anonymous payment methods I learned about. The mask I threw away. Sometimes I think I see it out of the corner of my eye, sitting on my bedside table or kitchen worktop. When I look directly, it's gone, but I know it's here, waiting. Just like I know that someday, maybe soon, I'll try it on. I keep telling myself I can resist this pull towards something monstrous, that I am still essentially good, essentially human. But late at night, when my laptop screen glows in the darkness of my bedroom, I'm less certain. If you're reading this, perhaps you felt that same curiosity. Perhaps you're considering taking that first step, downloading Tor, finding those forums just to see, just to know. Don't. Or if you do, know that you're not just looking into an abyss. You're opening a door that swings both ways, and what comes through might be wearing your face. My mobile is buzzing now with a text from a number I don't recognize. It's an address, somewhere local, and a time. Tonight, I won't go. I can't go. But I haven't deleted the message, and I know exactly how long it would take me to get there on the tube. Story 6, Blind Spot. I didn't recognize my reflection when I first saw it. Not immediately. It took a few seconds of staring at the screen before I realized I was looking at my own face, slightly distorted by the camera angle, but unmistakably me. My living room was behind me, dimly lit by the lamp I'd left on earlier. The image was grainy, but clear enough. What wasn't clear was how this live stream existed at all. Let me back up. I'm a cybersecurity consultant, not one of those high-level experts who protects government networks or counters state-sponsored hackers. My work involves helping small businesses implement basic security protocols, conducting vulnerability assessments for local companies, and occasionally assisting with data recovery. It's honest work that pays the bills, but it's rarely exciting. 3 weeks ago, a new client contacted me, a mental health clinic concerned about patient confidentiality after several employees reported strange network behaviors. When I arrived at their office, the clinic director explained their concerns with obvious discomfort. Several therapists had noticed their session recordings being accessed at odd hours, despite the files supposedly being secured in an encrypted system. Nothing had been stolen or altered as far as anyone could tell, but the access logs showed viewing activity during overnight hours when no staff should have been working. My initial assessment revealed a surprisingly sophisticated breach. Someone had created a backdoor into their network that bypassed standard security measures. This wasn't the work of an opportunistic hacker or disgruntled employee with basic skills. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. I isolated the compromised systems, implemented temporary security measures, and began the deeper forensic work of tracking the intrusion to its source. The digital trail led me through multiple proxy servers and anonymous networks. Whoever had accessed the clinic's files had taken elaborate precautions to hide their tracks. After days of careful analysis, I managed to identify a pattern in the connection timestamps. The access always occurred between 1 a.m. and 3 a.m., always on Tuesdays and Fridays, and always targeted the same subset of patient files: recordings of therapy sessions dealing with trauma, abuse, or severe anxiety disorders. My report to the clinic detailed the technical aspects of the breach and recommended comprehensive security upgrades. What I didn't include was my growing suspicion about the nature of the intrusion. This wasn't typical cybercrime seeking financial data or identity information. This was targeted surveillance of people's most vulnerable moments. The precision and pattern suggested something beyond simple data theft. Professional ethics dictated that I should complete my contract, submit my findings, and move on to the next client. But something about this case gnawed at me. The deliberate targeting of trauma patients felt predatory in a way that cybercrime rarely does. Most hackers I've encountered are motivated by financial gain or technical challenge, not the systematic observation of human suffering. After completing my official work for the clinic, I continued tracking the intrusion pattern on my own time. Using a secured system isolated from my personal network, I created digital breadcrumbs designed to attract the attention of whoever had breached the clinic's security. I set up dummy files mimicking the naming conventions of therapy recordings, embedded with unique markers that would help me trace anyone who accessed them. For 2 weeks, nothing happened. Then on a Tuesday night, my monitoring system alerted me to activity. Someone had taken the bait, accessing my dummy files through the same sophisticated methods used on the clinic's network. This time, I was prepared. As they downloaded my files, I deployed a specialized tracking script designed to pierce through proxy defenses and reveal connection origins. What I found led me to a series of encrypted channels on the dark web. Using anonymous browsing tools, I followed the digital trail to a nondescript forum that required Bitcoin payment for access. The page was minimalist, black background, simple text navigation, no graphics or branding. The site called itself The Witness Room and claimed to offer authentic moments of human vulnerability for discerning observers. I paid the entry fee using an anonymous cryptocurrency wallet and gained basic access to the forum. The site was organized into categories with clinical-sounding names: trauma responses, grief manifestations, anxiety episodes, confessional moments. Each category contained dozens of live streams and recorded videos. The view counts were low, usually under 50, but the payment required for each viewing was substantial. The first video I accessed showed a therapy session similar to those from the clinic. A person describing a traumatic experience to an off-camera therapist, unaware they were being observed by paying strangers on the internet. Other videos showed people alone in bedrooms or living spaces experiencing panic attacks, crying, or engaging in compulsive behaviors. All appeared to be recorded without the subject's knowledge. The site's premium section required additional payment and verification. After another cryptocurrency transfer and a waiting period of 24 hours, I gained access to this restricted area. Here, the content was categorized differently: direct engagement, controlled scenarios, live requests. The first live stream I accessed in this section showed an empty room with white walls and a single chair. Text on screen indicated that the broadcast would begin in 17 minutes and that scenario parameters had already been established by primary observers. A chat window showed usernames discussing technical aspects of the upcoming stream: camera angles, lighting requirements, audio quality. The clinical detachment of their conversation struck me as more disturbing than explicit anticipation would have been. I didn't stay to watch whatever was scheduled to occur in that room. Instead, I methodically documented the site structure, user patterns, and technical infrastructure. The operation was sophisticated, with multiple layers of security and anonymization. This wasn't some amateur effort. It had the hallmarks of an organized network with significant resources. After gathering sufficient information, I prepared a detailed report for federal law enforcement. I included everything I had discovered about the witness room, its connection to the clinic breach, and my analysis of how the operation functioned technically. I submitted the report through official channels, expecting to be contacted for follow-up information. A week passed with no response. I sent a follow-up inquiry and received an automated acknowledgement, but nothing substantive. After 10 days, I called the field office directly and was told my report had been received and forwarded to the appropriate department. The agent I spoke with seemed disinterested, almost dismissive. Frustrated by the lack of official response, I intensified my own investigation. I created a more comprehensive mapping of the witness room's network infrastructure, identifying potential server locations and administrative access points. I catalogued user patterns, payment flows, and content distribution methods. Each layer I uncovered revealed greater complexity and more disturbing implications. The live streams weren't just recordings of therapy sessions or private moments captured through compromised security systems. Some appeared to be deliberately staged scenarios where individuals were placed in situations designed to trigger emotional responses. The controllers would manipulate environmental factors, sounds, temperature, lighting, while observers in the chat suggested specific triggers to elicit desired reactions. 3 weeks into my investigation, I discovered something that fundamentally changed my understanding of what I was dealing with. Hidden in the site's technical architecture was a secondary network, a parallel system that monitored the observers themselves. Every user of the witness room was being recorded while they watched. Keystrokes logged, webcams quietly activated, microphones capturing ambient sounds. The watchers were also being watched. This discovery led me to a deeper level of the operation, accessed through a different entry point entirely. Here, the content consisted entirely of recordings of people watching the witness room streams, close-up footage of faces as they observed others suffering, metadata tracking their viewing patterns, physiological responses measured through subtle analysis of facial movements and breathing patterns. This meta-observation had its own audience, paying even higher premiums for access. I was documenting this secondary system when I noticed something odd about one of the observer recordings. The timestamp showed it was from the previous night, during hours when I had been accessing the witness room myself. With growing unease, I opened the file. The video showed a man sitting at a desk, illuminated by the blue glow of a computer monitor. The camera angle suggested a webcam perspective, looking slightly down at the subject. His face showed subtle expressions of concentration, occasional discomfort, and clinical interest. It took me several seconds to recognize my own reflection, captured from my laptop's camera, that I thought had been securely disabled. The video continued for over an hour, showing me methodically investigating the witness room, taking notes, examining different streams. Occasional metadata appeared on screen. My heart rate estimated through facial blood flow analysis, my pupil dilation tracked when viewing disturbing content, timestamps correlating my viewing patterns with specific website areas. Everything I had done to investigate them had provided them with content for their meta-observation network. I immediately shut down my system, disconnected from all networks, and physically removed the camera and microphones from my devices. I swept my apartment for hidden surveillance devices, finding nothing obvious but remaining unconvinced. The realization that I had become content for the very system I was investigating created a nauseating feedback loop of paranoia. That night, I carefully constructed a new secure system using components that had never been connected to my home network. I used this to draft detailed reports for multiple law enforcement agencies, journalistic organizations, and cybersecurity threat centers. I included all my evidence, analysis, and personal observations, sending each report through different anonymous channels. 2 days later, I received an email to my personal account, the one I had not used for any part of this investigation. The subject line contained only a timestamp matching exactly when I had sent my reports. The body of the email was empty, but attached there was a video file. Against all better judgment, I opened it on an isolated device. The video showed my apartment from multiple angles, views from devices that should not have existed, my television, computer monitor, phone screen, even my refrigerator with its smart display. All showed the same image. Me, sitting at my desk, drafting reports about the witness room. The footage zoomed in on my face, analyzing my expressions as I worked. Text appeared on screen. Subject demonstrates obsessive behavior patterns consistent with trauma response category 4B. Continued observation recommended. I abandoned my apartment that night, taking nothing electronic with me. I checked into a hotel using cash, bought a disposable phone, and contacted the few people I truly trusted. One friend in law enforcement agreed to meet me the following day. She arrived at our meeting location visibly uncomfortable. When I began explaining my findings about the witness room, she stopped me mid-sentence. Her department had received my report, she confirmed, but it had been flagged and reclassified almost immediately. She wasn't authorized to discuss the details, but her message was clear. Powerful interests were involved, and pursuing this further would have consequences. I spent the next week moving between hotels, using public computers to monitor for any signs that my reports had generated action. Nothing appeared in news outlets or public records. No investigations were announced. the witness room continued operating without disruption. 10 days after leaving my apartment, I received a text on my disposable phone, a phone whose number I had shared with exactly 3 people. The message contained only a website address. Against every rational instinct, I accessed it from a public computer. The page showed a live stream of the hotel room I had checked into that morning. The bed was empty, the room unoccupied. I was sitting in the hotel lobby as I viewed the stream. A timer in the corner showed the broadcast had been active for 3 hours. The view count displayed the number 7. The stream title was simply my full name followed by Observation Phase 2. That was yesterday. I've since crossed state lines, abandoned all electronic devices, and withdrawn cash to live on while I consider my options. I'm writing this account by hand, planning to have it typed and distributed by someone with no connection to me or this situation. I don't know exactly what the witness room is or who operates it. The technical sophistication suggests resources beyond typical criminal organizations. The apparent immunity from law enforcement implies protection or participation at institutional levels. The methodical nature of their observation network indicates purpose beyond voyeurism or profit. What I do know is that somewhere, right now, someone is watching a live stream of a person who doesn't know they're being observed. Someone is paying to witness another human being's vulnerable moments. Someone is analyzing reactions, cataloging responses, building profiles of both the observed and the observers. And increasingly, I suspect that the true purpose of the witness room isn't the content it provides to its users. The real product is the understanding of human psychology that comes from watching people watch others. The multi-layered observation that reveals patterns of behavior, predictors of response, blueprints of manipulation. I check for cameras everywhere now, not just obvious devices, but any object that could potentially house monitoring equipment. I vary my routines, change my appearance, avoid patterns. Still, I feel watched, not by supernatural forces or paranoid delusion, but by a system designed specifically to observe people like me, people who have glimpsed something they weren't meant to see, whose reactions to that glimpse are themselves valuable data. Tonight I'll move again, find another anonymous place to sleep. But before I do, I'll look directly into the nearest screen, television, traffic camera, ATM interface, it doesn't matter which, and I'll acknowledge the observers I know are there. Not with fear or defiance, but with the calm recognition that in a world where vulnerable moments can be commodified, the most vulnerable moment of all is the one where you realize you've always been in someone's blind spot, always been visible to eyes you never knew were watching. Verification. I keep thinking this is someone else's life I'm living now. 8 weeks ago, my biggest worry was making rent on my flat in Brixton. Now I have a burner phone, 3 different hair colors in my bathroom bin, and a constant feeling like there's a target on my back, all because I tried to help someone I thought was my friend. My name doesn't matter anymore. I used to be a paralegal at a mid-sized corporate law firm in London. Nothing special, just contract reviews and document preparation. The pay was decent. My flat was small, but mine. And I had what I thought were good friends. Tara was one of them. We met at the firm 3 years ago. She was in marketing. I was in legal. We weren't best mates or anything, but we got lunch together sometimes and complained about our bosses. About 2 months ago, Tara stopped showing up to work. No calls, no emails, nothing. After a week, HR just said she'd resigned for personal reasons. It happened pretty quickly. One day she was there, the next her desk was cleared out. A few people tried calling her, but her number was disconnected. Her social media went dark. Nobody seemed particularly worried. People quit all the time. Except I had just seen her the Friday before she disappeared. We'd gotten drinks after work at our local in Soho, and she seemed fine. Better than fine, actually. She was excited about some side project she was working on that was going to let her finally quit the corporate grind. She was being secretive about it, but in a fun way, not concerning. Said she'd tell me all about it once everything was finalized. So when she vanished, I was worried. I tried her email, her old flatmate, even drove by her apartment in Clapham. The flatmate said Tara had moved out suddenly, no forwarding address. The building manager said the same thing. Rent paid through the month, keys left in the letterbox. That might have been the end of it, except for the thumb drive. Tara had borrowed my external hard drive a few weeks before she disappeared, saying she needed extra storage for some marketing videos. When she returned it, apparently she accidentally left one of her own thumb drives in the case. I didn't notice until I was using the hard drive myself and found this unmarked black USB stick. I figured it probably had her marketing stuff on it, maybe something she'd need for her new venture. I plugged it in, thinking I could email whatever files were on it to her personal account, even if she didn't respond. The drive was password protected, which was odd for work files. I was about to give up when I remembered Tara always used the same password for everything. Her cat's name, plus the year she graduated uni. It worked on the first try. There were only a few files on the drive. One was a text document with what looked like login credentials. Another was a spreadsheet with dates, times, and amounts. Large amounts, like tens of thousands of pounds each. The third was a video file simply labeled verification. The video wasn't long, maybe 2 minutes. It started with a black screen and text stating the date from about a month ago. Then it showed a plain room with concrete walls, maybe a basement. There was a person tied to a chair in the center, head covered with some kind of hood. A figure in a dark mask stood behind them, holding up a piece of paper with a series of numbers and today's date, like those hostage verification videos you sometimes hear about. The masked person then set the paper down, picked up something from a table just off camera, and approached the bound person. That's when I closed the video. I didn't want to see what happened next. I felt sick. My first thought was that this was some kind of joke, or maybe footage from an indie horror film Tara was working on. But then why the spreadsheet with all that money? And why would she have disappeared right after? I reopened the text file with the credentials. There was a URL I didn't recognize, not a normal website address, but something ending in .onion. I knew enough to recognize it as a Tor address, those hidden sites you can only access with special browsers. Below it was a username and password, along with instructions for a 2-factor authentication app. I should have gone to the police right then. That would have been the smart thing to do. But I kept thinking about Tara. What if she was the person in that chair? What if she was in trouble and needed help? And if I'm being honest, I was curious. What was this thing she had been so excited about that had potentially gotten her into trouble? I installed the Tor browser that night. It took some figuring out, but I managed to get to the address. It looked like a simple login page with a plain black background and the word observatory at the top. No other information, no hints about what the site was for. I entered the username and password from the file. The next page asked for a verification code from the authentication app. I didn't have that, so I couldn't go further. But there was a small help link at the bottom of the page. I clicked it, expecting FAQs or contact information. Instead, it took me to a page explaining what the site was, a viewing platform for private events. The description was clinical, almost businesslike, but I understood what it meant. This was a red room, one of those dark web urban legends where people pay to watch torture or murder in real time. Except it wasn't a legend, it was real, and somehow Tara was involved. The page explained the pricing tiers. Basic membership was £8,000, which allowed viewing access only. Executive membership was £40,000, which granted voting rights on what happened during events. And then there was producer status at £200,000, which allowed members to commission specific events. I closed the browser immediately. This couldn't be real. These things didn't actually exist. They were stories people told to scare each other, like alligators in the sewers or razor blades in Halloween candy. But then I remembered the verification video, the date card, the spreadsheet with all those transactions. The next day at work, I couldn't focus. I kept thinking about Tara, about that video, about what I had found. Had she stumbled onto this like I had? Or was she involved somehow? I couldn't imagine her participating in something so horrific. But then again, she had been excited about a lucrative side project. During lunch, I used a computer in an unused conference room to do some research. I didn't want this in my search history. I looked up red rooms trying to find out if they were real or just internet folklore. Most sources said they were myths, technically impossible to stream reliably over the Tor network. But a few suggested they were real, but extremely rare, requiring significant technical infrastructure and insider connections to access. That evening, I made a decision I still regret. I went back to the site, but this time from a public computer at a library in Camden. I wanted to see if there was any way to find out more without actually logging in. There wasn't much, but I discovered a calendar of upcoming events visible on the login page. The next one was scheduled for Friday night, just 2 days away. I spent those 2 days trying to decide what to do. Go to the police. What would I say? I had a thumb drive with a disturbing video and login credentials to what might be an illegal site. Would they take me seriously? Would they think I was involved somehow? And what about Tara? If she was in danger, would going to the authorities put her at more risk? I decided to try one more thing before going to the police. I installed the two-factor authentication app and used the setup key that was in the text file. To my surprise, it worked. I now had access to the verification codes needed to fully log in. I didn't plan to actually view any events, but I thought I might find information about Tara or evidence I could take to the authorities. On Friday night, I used the Tor browser and the authentication codes to log into the observatory site. The interface was surprisingly professional, like a high-end video conferencing platform. There was a main viewing area currently showing a countdown timer with about 20 minutes remaining. Below that was a chat box where members were already discussing the upcoming event. To the right was a list of about 30 users currently online, all with anonymous handles. I didn't interact, just observed. As I watched, I noticed something disturbing. The users were discussing the subject for tonight's event, referring to them by a code name. They mentioned specific details about this person, their occupation, their habits, even their taste in music. The way they talked was clinical, almost bored, like executives discussing a business proposal. That's when a private message popped up on my screen. Someone with the username producer_3 had noticed me. The message asked if I was enjoying my first visit and whether I had received a personal invitation. They noted that my account was registered to someone else, someone who was no longer with their organization. They wanted to know how I had gained access. I didn't respond, but my heart was racing. They knew I wasn't supposed to be there. I was about to log off when another message came through. This one included my real name and address in Brixton. They said they had tracked my connection, impossible through Tor, but maybe they had other ways of monitoring access to the site. They said they knew I had Tara's drive and that I had watched the verification video. They said a car was already on its way to my flat. I shut everything down and left the library immediately. I didn't go home. I went to a hotel in King's Cross and paid cash for the room. That night, I saw on the local news that there had been a gas leak in my building. The residents had been evacuated while authorities investigated. There was footage of people standing outside in their pajamas, looking confused. I recognized my neighbors. The next morning, I withdrew as much cash as I could from my accounts, bought a prepaid phone, and got on a train to Manchester. From there, I kept moving, staying in cheap B&Bs, changing my appearance, using only cash. I've been moving ever since. I never went to the police. After seeing what happened at my flat, I'm convinced they have connections in law enforcement. These aren't amateurs. The site had too many users, too much money flowing through it. This is an organized operation with resources. Sometimes I think about the people in those videos. Were they random victims or chosen for specific reasons? Were they people who discovered something they shouldn't have, like me? Or were they selected based on those detailed profiles the members discussed, targeted specifically for someone's entertainment? I keep wondering about Tara. Was she a victim? Was she involved? Did she try to expose them and pay the price? Or did she try to profit from it somehow? I'll probably never know. I've changed hotels again today. The cleaning lady gave me a strange look this morning, like she recognized me. It might have been nothing, but I can't take chances. I'll dye my hair again tonight, maybe change my style completely. Last week, I saw a missing person flyer at a train station. It was for a man in his 30s, last seen leaving his office in Birmingham. The flyer said he worked as a cybersecurity consultant and had no history of disappearing. Something about his occupation made my stomach turn. Had he stumbled onto the same thing I had? I know they're still looking for me. I'm not important enough for them to spend significant resources on tracking down. But I've seen how their operation works. They're methodical, patient. They have money and connections, and they can't afford loose ends. Sometimes I consider turning myself in, going to the National Crime Agency rather than local police. But what proof do I have now? The thumb drive is hidden, hundreds of miles away. I have no evidence, just a story that sounds impossible. So I keep moving, keep looking over my shoulder. I've become good at spotting details, cars that linger too long, people whose eyes follow me in corner shops. I pay attention to emergency exits and back doors wherever I go. I've learned to live with less sleep. The hardest part is the isolation. I can't contact family or friends, can't use social media, can't stay in one place long enough to make connections. Some days the loneliness is worse than the fear. I don't know how long I can keep living like this. Maybe one day they'll decide I'm not worth the trouble and stop looking. Maybe I'll find a way to disappear completely, get a new identity, start over, somewhere far away. Or maybe they'll find me, and I'll become just another missing person, another name on a flyer that people glance at and forget. What haunts me most isn't the fear of being caught. It's knowing that right now, even as I write this, another event might be starting, another countdown timer reaching 0, another group of bored, wealthy viewers logging in from around the world, another person who has no idea they've been chosen. And no one would believe it's real even if I told them. That's the perfect cover. Something so terrible most people dismiss it as an urban legend or creepypasta. Something that could never actually happen in the real world. The viewing room. I keep telling myself this will all blow over, that I'm overreacting. Normal people don't suddenly become fugitives because of something they saw at work. But then I remember their faces when they caught me in that room, and I know I'm not imagining things. It started with expense reports that didn't add up, just boring accounting stuff. Nobody gets killed over spreadsheet errors. At least that's what I thought before last month. I never thought I'd be the type of person to stumble onto something I wasn't supposed to see. My life has always been painfully normal. Working as a forensic accountant for a mid-sized insurance company, living in a one-bedroom apartment in Cincinnati, spending weekends either reading or binging whatever news show everyone was talking about. Nothing remarkable. Nothing that would make me a target. It started with a simple discrepancy in the books. Our company had been showing unusual expenses categorized vaguely as network infrastructure maintenance. Large payments happening monthly that didn't match any of our regular vendor contracts. As the senior forensic accountant, it fell on me to figure out why. The CFO was breathing down our department's neck because these unexplained costs were affecting our quarterly projections. My initial audit showed unusual purchases coming from a single cost center within our building, specifically one tied to the executive floor. The strange part was that the equipment being purchased wasn't standard office technology. It was high-end server components, advanced networking gear, and specialized hardware that our insurance company had no business buying. The paperwork traced back to an authorization code for a supply closet on the executive floor. Not an office, not a conference room, a supply closet. I decided to check it out myself rather than escalate to my manager. Looking back, that was my first mistake. Getting access to the executive floor after hours required a security badge with special permissions. I didn't have those permissions, but I did have access to the security logs for my audit work. Another mistake. I noticed a cleaning crew badge that consistently accessed the executive floor every evening. A badge that, according to HR records, belonged to a person who had quit 3 months ago. The badge was still active. I borrowed it from the security office, claiming I needed to check its access history for my audit. Just temporarily, I told myself. Just to solve the financial discrepancy. I wasn't planning to snoop around or anything. The executive floor was eerily quiet after 7 p.m. The cleaning crew had already come and gone, leaving behind the faint smell of industrial cleaner and the soft hum of air conditioning. I followed the purchasing records and traced the equipment deliveries to the supply closet at the end of the hallway. The door was unmarked and locked with a keypad, not standard for a supply closet. I hadn't expected that. I stood there for a moment, contemplating whether I should turn back. But curiosity got the better of me. From my audit work, I had access to the company's vendor payment systems. I checked recent maintenance records for that floor and found the contractor who had installed the keypad. Their invoice included the default access code that had been programmed initially. Another ethical line crossed. The closet was dark when I entered, smelling of dust and electronics rather than cleaning supplies. When I flipped the light switch, I found not mops and paper towels, but a small server setup, a powerful custom-built machine connected directly to our network backbone. It had multiple hard drives attached to it, a high-end graphics card, and several cameras connected via USB. This wasn't company equipment. Someone had installed their own private server in a hidden location. I should have walked away then, should have reported it and let security handle it. Instead, I examined the equipment, thinking I'd just check what kind of operation was running that required such expensive gear. Professional curiosity, I told myself. The server had a spreadsheet with login credentials saved right on the desktop. Whoever set it up probably never expected anyone to physically access it. Within minutes, I was looking through their files. What I found was a sophisticated streaming setup with automated scheduling software that activated every night. It was configured to connect to an encrypted address, a dark website. I recognized enough about cybersecurity from our company's compliance training to know this wasn't good, but I didn't immediately connect the dots to what I was looking at. The server contained archived video files, each labeled with dates going back months. Against my better judgment, I opened one from the previous week. The video showed a room I recognized, our company's soundproofed wellness room that had been installed during the pandemic for employees who needed a quiet space. Only in the video, it didn't look like a wellness room anymore. The furniture had been rearranged, and plastic sheeting covered the floor and walls. A person lay strapped to a table in the center, clearly terrified but unable to move or speak due to restraints and a gag. A figure in a dark mask stood over them, methodically arranging what looked like medical instruments on a small tray. I shut the video off before I saw what happened next. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely use the mouse. This was a red room, one of those dark web myth horror stories where people paid to watch torture or worse. Except it wasn't a myth, and it was happening in my building, on my company's dime. My mind raced through implications. The unusual expenses, the specialized equipment, the location on the executive floor. Someone high up in my company was running this operation, using our infrastructure, our building, and I had just accessed their server, leaving fingerprints everywhere. I disconnected from the server, closed the closet door, and tried to appear normal as I walked to the elevator, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure anyone could hear it. I drove home in a daze, constantly checking my rearview mirror, certain I was being followed. That night, I couldn't sleep. I paced my apartment, debating what to do. Go to the police. I had no proof. I hadn't downloaded any files, and accessing that server the way I did was technically illegal. Go to my boss. What if they were involved? The server was on the executive floor after all. Morning came, and I called in sick for the first time in 3 years. I spent the day researching, trying to figure out how these red room operations worked. The more I learned, the worse it got. These weren't just random victims. They were carefully selected, often people without close family or connections, people who wouldn't be missed immediately. My company processed insurance claims. We had access to detailed information about people's lives, their family situations, their medical histories. As a forensic accountant, I had seen patterns in our life insurance claim denials, single people, immigrants, people estranged from their families, all with policies that had lapsed just before their mysterious disappearances. I decided to gather evidence properly. That night, I went back to the office with a plan. I brought a portable drive and planned to copy just enough evidence to take to the FBI, then wipe my prints from the server room. It would be risky, but I couldn't live with myself if I did nothing. The executive floor was dark again when I arrived. I made my way to the closet, used the code, and slipped inside. But as soon as I touched the server, I knew something was wrong. It was cool to the touch, powered down. Someone knew it had been discovered. As I turned to leave, the door opened. My boss stood there, looking unsurprised to see me. Behind him was our chief operating officer, a man I'd seen only in company-wide meetings. They didn't need to speak. Their expressions said everything. The subtle nod of acknowledgement from my boss, the evaluating gaze of the COO as he looked me up and down, the slight gesture toward the hallway, inviting me to follow, the unspoken threat hanging in the air between us. I realized with sickening clarity what was happening. They weren't going to kill me. They were recruiting me. I managed to respond with a non-committal gesture, a nervous smile, pretending to consider their unspoken offer while inching toward the door. They let me leave, their eyes following me all the way to the elevator. I drove home in a panic, threw some clothes in a bag, and headed straight for the interstate. I drove through the night, stopping only for gas, paying cash. I abandoned my car in Indianapolis and bought a used one from a private seller on Craigslist. I withdrew my savings in small amounts from different ATMs to avoid triggering alerts. It's been 3 weeks now. I'm writing this from a motel room in a small town I won't name, using a laptop I bought secondhand and a prepaid internet connection. I've changed my appearance, stopped using credit cards or my phone. In my paranoia, I've checked this room for hidden cameras at least a dozen times today alone. The thing that keeps me awake isn't just fear of being found. It's what I realized on that long drive away from Cincinnati. The financial records I'd been auditing showed connections to shell companies all over the world. This wasn't a small operation. The Red Room was just one part of something much larger, a network that had potentially been operating for years, hidden behind legitimate business transactions. Sometimes I think about the faces I saw in the company directory, wondering which ones were involved and which ones might have been victims. I wonder if I should have gone to the authorities immediately. Consequences be damned. But then I remember the casual confidence of my boss and the COO. How unworried they seemed about my discovery. These weren't people afraid of getting caught. Yesterday, I noticed a car I didn't recognize parked across from my motel. It was there all day, and when I woke up this morning, it was gone. But there was a different, unfamiliar car in its place. It could be nothing, just travelers passing through. But I don't think so. My options are narrowing. I've considered going to the FBI, but I have no evidence, and I accessed that server illegally. I've thought about reaching out to journalists, but how do I know which ones I can trust? Everyone has an online presence now, connections that can be traced, leveraged. The owner of this motel knocked on my door an hour ago. His face was neutral, but his eyes were nervous. Someone had called asking about a person matching my description. A concerned relative looking for their missing cousin, he said. I shook my head, thanked him for letting me know. He nodded and left without another word. I'm checking out tonight anyway. As I pack my few belongings, I keep thinking about balance sheets, how it all started with a simple financial discrepancy, money flowing where it shouldn't. Now my life has become a similar anomaly, moving in patterns I never anticipated, always aware of watching eyes. If you're reading this, it means I've decided to upload my story somewhere public, maybe as insurance, maybe as a warning. I don't know if it will make a difference. All I know is that the world has hidden depths I never imagined, running parallel to our everyday lives, separated by nothing more than a door we're not supposed to open. I opened that door, and now I can never close it again. Story 9, Latency. I moved to Seoul 3 years ago to teach English at a private academy, the transition from my small Midwestern hometown. to one of the most technologically advanced cities in the world was jarring in ways I hadn't anticipated. The crowded subway stations, the constant digital advertisements on every surface, the blinding speed of the internet, all of it overwhelmed me initially. But humans adapt. After 6 months, I barely noticed these things anymore. What I did notice was my growing sense of isolation. Despite being surrounded by millions of people, my limited Korean and cultural differences created invisible barriers. Most of my social interactions were with other foreign teachers who came and went as their contracts ended. The few Korean friends I made were busy with demanding jobs and family obligations. Gradually, my world narrowed to my small apartment, the academy where I taught, and the convenience store on the corner. I'm telling you this to explain why I spend so much time online. In a city where I often felt invisible, the internet offered connection. I joined forums for expatriates, video chatted with family back home, and participated in online gaming communities. My laptop became my primary window to human interaction beyond the superficial conversations at work. My apartment came with the fastest internet connection I'd ever experienced, a common feature in Seoul, where digital infrastructure is prioritized. Downloads that would have taken hours back home completed in seconds. Video calls never lagged. Streaming was instantaneous. This remarkable connectivity became something I took for granted until the night it inexplicably faltered. It started with minor disruptions, buffering videos, delayed messages, dropped calls. Frustrating but not unusual, even in Seoul. I ran speed tests showing significantly reduced bandwidth. Thinking it might be a building-wide issue, I messaged my neighbor, another English teacher, who often helped me navigate these small annoyances of expatriate life. He reported no problems with his connection. I contacted my internet provider, navigating their automated customer service system with my limited Korean. After several redirections, I received a message that a technician would check the external connections to my building the following day. Until then, I would have to manage with the degraded service. That night, trying to video chat with my sister, the connection became so poor that her image froze repeatedly, her voice cutting in and out until we gave up. After ending the failed call, I noticed something odd. Despite the video call being disconnected, my laptop's network activity indicator showed continuous data transfer, uploading and downloading at significant rates. I opened my network monitoring application, something I rarely used but had installed months earlier when troubleshooting a different issue. The interface displayed active connections between my device and multiple unfamiliar IP addresses. Data was flowing through ports I hadn't authorized. My first thought was malware. Perhaps I'd clicked something I shouldn't have, and now my computer was part of some botnet. I initiated security scans, closed all applications, and even physically disconnected from the internet by unplugging my router. The network activity indicator went dark, as expected. I reconnected and immediately observed the unauthorized data transfer resuming. The security scans found nothing suspicious. The next day, the internet technician arrived while I was at work. When I returned home that evening, I found a note in broken English explaining that no issues had been detected with the external connection. The technician had reset my router and suggested the problem might be with my laptop. The note included standard recommendations: restart the device, clear the cache, check for system updates. I followed these instructions, even performing a system restore to a point weeks earlier. The unauthorized network activity continued. What changed was my internet speed, no longer degraded, but functioning at its usual remarkable pace, despite the mysterious data transfers happening in the background. That night, I received a message from a username I didn't recognize on a messaging platform I rarely used. The message contained only a link, no text. Normally, I would never click such a thing, but exhaustion and frustration had worn down my usual caution. The link led to what appeared to be a troubleshooting forum in Korean. Using a browser translation tool, I could make out technical discussions about network routing, VPN configurations, and bandwidth allocation. One thread caught my attention, a conversation about something called passive nodes in residential networks. The translation was imperfect, but I gathered that certain high-speed connections in densely populated areas could be utilized as relay points for data transmission without the user's knowledge. The thread described this as a common practice among certain online communities requiring anonymized traffic. As I scrolled through the discussion, a private message appeared from a forum user with the name Node Manager. Translated, the message asked if I was experiencing connectivity issues and offered assistance. I hesitantly explained my situation, the unexplained data transfers, the initial speed degradation, the failed troubleshooting attempts. The response came quickly, explaining that my internet connection had likely been incorporated into a private routing network without my authorization. The initial slowdown occurred during the integration process, but now that my connection was fully configured as a node, the system was allocating resources more efficiently, allowing both normal usage and background data relay. I asked what kind of data was being transmitted through my connection. The response was vague. Secure communications requiring privacy protection, nothing illegal, nothing that would be traced back to me. When I expressed concern about having my network used without consent, Node Manager offered to remove my connection from their system for a fee in cryptocurrency. This had all the hallmarks of a scam, but the technical details matched exactly what I was experiencing. I declined the payment option and stated my intention to report this to my internet provider and local authorities. The final message I received contained just 2 words in English: "Watch first." A moment later, a link appeared. Against every instinct of self-preservation, I clicked it. The page that loaded had a minimal interface, a black background, a video player in the center, a timestamp, and a view account showing 17. The video showed an empty room with white walls. The timestamp indicated the feed was live. For several minutes, nothing happened. I was about to close the browser when a person entered the frame. Their face was obscured by digital pixelation, but their body language suggested nervousness. They sat in a chair facing the camera and held up a piece of paper with writing I couldn't read from the angle shown. The viewer count increased to 23. A small text field appeared below the video, showing messages in various languages. Using translation tools, I could see viewers asking for the subject to perform specific actions. Most requests were simple: raise a hand, stand up, turn around. The person complied with each instruction, movements becoming increasingly reluctant as the request continued. I closed the browser, deeply disturbed by whatever I had witnessed. Within seconds, my messenger pinged with another message from Node Manager. An image of my face, captured moments earlier through my laptop's webcam, which I had never activated. Below the image was text explaining that my network node was being used to route encrypted streams for a private viewing community. Attempting to interfere would result in my transition from relay point to content subject. I shut down my laptop immediately, unplugged all devices, and spent a sleepless night contemplating my options. The next morning, I purchased a new laptop and a mobile hotspot from a provider different from my home internet service. Using this completely separate connection, I researched what I had stumbled into. information was sparse and contradictory. Some sources dismissed red rooms as urban legends, technically impossible due to bandwidth limitations of anonymized networks. Others suggested they existed, but were elaborate scams, staged performances marketed as authentic to separate cryptocurrency from gullible viewers. A few troubling accounts described them as genuine operations run by technically sophisticated criminal networks exploiting high-speed infrastructure in countries with advanced digital ecosystems. South Korea, with its extraordinary connectivity and dense urban population, appeared repeatedly in these discussions. The country's internet speeds, among the fastest globally, made it ideal for services requiring substantial bandwidth. Its urban density meant residential connections could be compromised without drawing attention, lost in the digital noise of millions of concurrent users. I considered reporting my experience to authorities but hesitated. My visa status made me reluctant to draw official attention. My limited Korean would make explaining the technical nuances difficult. Most importantly, I had no evidence beyond the messages on my compromised laptop, which I was now afraid to access again. Instead, I contacted a cybersecurity consultant recommended in an expatriate forum. We met in a busy cafe where I explained the situation. His expression remained neutral throughout my account, but his questions became increasingly specific about the interface I had seen, the routing methods described, and the patterns of data transfer. After I finished, he explained that what I had encountered was unfortunately real. Certain buildings in Seoul, particularly those with direct connections to the city's advanced fiber infrastructure, were specifically targeted for integration into these networks. Foreign residents were preferred targets, less likely to report issues, more likely to attribute problems to cultural or language misunderstandings, often living alone with fewer people to notice strange digital occurrences. The consultant offered to secure my new devices and investigate my home network for a substantial fee. Desperate for help, I agreed. 2 days later, he came to my apartment, bringing specialized equipment to analyze the connection without directly engaging with it. His examination confirmed what Node Manager had claimed. My internet service had been configured as a relay node for encrypted streams, with a secondary function allowing remote access to connected devices. The modification was sophisticated, operating at the router firmware level. Simply replacing the router wouldn't solve the problem, as the access point in the building's telecommunications closet had also been compromised. Moving to a different provider wouldn't help either, as most used the same physical infrastructure in this area. The consultant implemented temporary security measures, a hardware firewall, encrypted DNS services, VPN protocols, while acknowledging these were bandages on a more fundamental problem. His recommendation was blunt: move to a different building as soon as possible. Until then, assume all connected devices were potentially compromised. I began searching for a new apartment immediately, but lease terms in Seoul are complicated, typically requiring substantial deposits and minimum stay periods. Breaking my current contract would mean losing thousands of dollars I couldn't afford to forfeit. A week after implementing the security measures, I received a paper letter in my mailbox, unusual in itself, as most communications in Seoul are digital. The letter contained a printed screenshot of my new laptop's desktop, taken the previous day, along with a list of websites I had visited while researching new apartments. The message was clear: the security measures had failed or been circumvented. That night, my apartment lost power briefly, just a few seconds, but long enough to reset all electronic devices. When service resumed, the hardware firewall the consultant had installed showed its configuration had been reset to default settings. The VPN connection had disconnected. The specialized DNS settings had reverted. I contacted the consultant again, who seemed genuinely disturbed by this development. The level of access required to coordinate a targeted power interruption with immediate reconfiguration of security devices suggested resources beyond typical hackers. He advised me to leave the apartment immediately, even if it meant financial loss. I spent that night in a hotel, using only my mobile phone with a new SIM card purchased with cash. In the morning, I returned to my apartment to pack essential items, planning to stay with a colleague until finding new housing. As I entered, my phone received a notification despite being disconnected from Wi-Fi and using the new SIM. The message contained my current location coordinates and the simple text, "Node status remains active." I packed quickly, taking only what would fit in a backpack. As I was leaving, my neighbor, the one who had reported no internet issues, was entering his apartment. He nodded in greeting, then paused, looking at my backpack. He asked in perfect English if I was going somewhere. When I vaguely mentioned visiting a friend, he smiled and said perhaps my internet issues would be resolved when I returned. Something in his expression made me deeply uncomfortable. I mumbled a response and hurried away, but not before noticing a small pin on his lapel, a design I recognized from the forum, where I had first encountered discussions of passive nodes. The icon resembled a stylized eye with a digital motif. I never returned to that apartment. I forfeited my deposit, left most of my possessions, and moved to a different district of Seoul. I changed jobs, altered my online presence, and replaced all electronic devices. For several months, I detected no unusual network activities or unexplained communications. Then yesterday, while using a public Wi-Fi connection at a cafe I'd never previously visited, I received an email to an address I had created only weeks earlier and shared with no one. The message contained a single image, a screenshot of the coffee shop's security camera feed showing me sitting at my current table, captured moments earlier. Below was a viewer count, 31. I don't know if I'll ever escape this network. It exists in the infrastructure itself, in the invisible digital pathways we've woven through our modern world. Sometimes I wonder how many others are unknowingly serving as nodes, their connections becoming conduits for streams they'll never see, their cameras capturing moments they don't know are being shared. The internet has no memory limitations, no capacity for mercy, no mechanism for true deletion. Somewhere in that vast digital architecture, everything is preserved, including, I suspect, whatever they recorded through my devices during those weeks. I've become content in a library I can't access, viewed by people I'll never identify. What terrifies me most isn't that I'm still being watched. It's the possibility that I always was, that the entire digital ecosystem we've built is fundamentally, architecturally designed for observation, not by governments or corporations, but by whoever has the technical skill to access its deeper functions. And in that shadow network, latency isn't just a measure of connection speed. It's the delay between becoming a node and realizing you've always been a subject. Story 4 Bandwidth. I started working from home last January. The transition wasn't difficult. My job as a data analyst for a health insurance company translated well to remote work. Just me, my laptop, and endless spreadsheets tracking claim patterns and cost projections. The company sent us home with monitors, docking stations, and even ergonomic chairs. They wanted to make sure our productivity wouldn't suffer during the isolation. My apartment wasn't ideal for a home office. One bedroom, thin walls, and neighbors who seemed determined to renovate during business hours. I converted half my living room into a workspace, setting up near the window for natural light. The arrangement worked well enough for the first few months. My internet connection was reliable, my work routine established, my performance reviews positive. In April, I started having connection issues. Video calls would freeze, downloads would stall. Websites that had loaded instantly now took ages to appear. At first, I blamed my service provider. They were notorious for throttling speeds during peak hours. But after several technician visits and modem replacements, the problems persisted. Strangely, the issues seemed most pronounced between midnight and 4 a.m., when I wasn't even using the internet. I started monitoring my network traffic using software recommended by our IT department. The data showed massive bandwidth consumption during those early morning hours, despite all my devices supposedly being in sleep mode. Something was using my connection and using it heavily. My first thought was a neighbor had somehow accessed my network. I changed my Wi-Fi password, enabled additional security features, and installed a VPN. The mysterious usage continued. Next, I suspected malware. Perhaps my laptop had been compromised and was part of some botnet. I ran every scanning tool available, finding nothing unusual. The IT team remotely inspected my work laptop and pronounced it clean. The mystery bothered me enough that I began staying up late, watching the network monitor in real time, trying to identify which device was responsible. My sleep suffered. Dark circles formed under my eyes. My work performance began to decline. Colleagues commented on my appearance during video calls. I started keeping the camera off. One night in May, around 1 a.m., I caught it happening. The network monitor showed active data transfer, nearly maxing out my bandwidth. The source was a device listed only as media server, something I didn't recognize and certainly hadn't set up. I immediately logged into my router's admin panel to block the device, but when I refreshed the connected devices list, media server had disappeared. The next day, I contacted my building's management company about the internet issues. The maintenance supervisor suggested I might be picking up interference from other apartments and recommended positioning my router away from shared walls. When I mentioned the mysterious device, he seemed uninterested, attributing it to a neighbor's smart TV or gaming system, briefly connecting to the wrong network. That explanation didn't satisfy me. I ordered a new router with advanced security features, setting it up to log all connection attempts and data usage by device. That night, I stayed up again, watching the logs in real time. At precisely 1:17 a.m., media server appeared again, beginning its huge data transfers. This time, I managed to capture its MAC address before it disappeared, a unique identifier that should help track down the physical device. The next morning, I contacted a friend who works in cybersecurity. He couldn't identify the manufacturer from the MAC address. It seemed to be using a randomized identifier that changed with each connection. This was sophisticated behavior, not typical of consumer electronics accidentally connecting to the wrong network. When I shared the timing pattern and bandwidth usage, he grew concerned. The behavior matched what he called data mules, compromised networks used to transmit large encrypted files during low traffic hours. My friend warned me that my network might be being used for transferring illegal content, anything from stolen financial data to more disturbing materials. He recommended I contact my internet service provider and possibly law enforcement. The thought that my connection might be facilitating something illegal made me deeply uncomfortable. Before taking that step, I decided to gather more information. I set up additional monitoring software that could track not just the amount of data, but also attempt to identify the type of traffic and its destination. The results were puzzling. The data wasn't being sent to multiple destinations as would be expected with botnet activity. Instead, it was a sustained connection to a single endpoint, using encrypted protocols that masked the content. The destination IP address changed nightly, but always pointed to servers using Tor exit nodes, the infrastructure of the so-called dark web. My friend confirmed this was consistent with someone using my network as a relay for accessing hidden services, potentially to mask their own identity. The question remained, who was doing this and how had they gained access? I became obsessed with finding answers. I started logging every electronic device in my apartment, not just computers and phones, but the smart TV, digital thermostat, even the refrigerator with its internet connectivity feature. None matched the mysterious media server MAC address. I checked for hidden devices, looking behind furniture, inside vents, examining the electrical outlets for suspicious adapters. Nothing. In June, after 6 weeks of disrupted sleep and growing anxiety, I made a breakthrough. The mystery device only connected when I was home. On nights I stayed at a friend's place or worked late at a coffee shop. My network log showed no unusual activity. The implication was unsettling. Whatever was happening was somehow tied to my presence. That night, I conducted an experiment. I left all my devices powered on as usual, but shut off the bedroom and bathroom lights, creating the impression I had gone to sleep. Then I sat in darkness near my router, a network analyzer running silently on my laptop. At 1:14 a.m., I heard a soft electronic tone from somewhere in my apartment, almost imperceptible, like the sound a device makes when powering on. 3 minutes later, media server appeared on my network. I tracked the signal strength, moving my laptop around the apartment to find where it was strongest. The source appeared to be my bedroom. I searched methodically, under the bed, in the closet, behind the dresser. Nothing. Then I noticed my work laptop, closed and apparently asleep on the nightstand. According to my monitoring software, it wasn't the source. But when I opened it, the screen remained dark while the power indicator showed it was running. I forced a shutdown and restarted it. Everything seemed normal. The company's security software showed no unauthorized access, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong with the machine. I decided to work exclusively on my personal laptop for a few days, leaving the work device powered off and stored in a drawer. The mysterious bandwidth usage stopped immediately. 3 nights with no media server appearing on my network. On the 4th day, I received an email from IT asking why my work laptop hadn't connected to the company servers for scheduled updates. I explained I was having technical issues and was using my personal device temporarily. They insisted I reconnect the work laptop as soon as possible for security compliance. Reluctantly, I took the laptop from the drawer and powered it on. Everything appeared normal. Same login screen, same desktop configuration, same applications. But that night, media server reappeared on my network at exactly 1:17 a.m. I was now convinced the work laptop contained something it shouldn't. I contacted IT again, more explicitly describing my concerns. They seemed dismissive, suggesting I was misinterpreting normal corporate security measures that run in the background. When I pressed further, mentioning the dark web connections, their tone changed. They said they would send a replacement laptop immediately and asked me to return my current one directly to their security team, rather than through the normal equipment channels. The replacement arrived the next day via courier. The security team requested I not power on the old laptop again and pack it in the provided shielded bag. Their sudden urgency only heightened my suspicion. That night, with the old laptop unplugged and sealed in the shielded bag, my network remained quiet. No unusual connections, no bandwidth spikes. In July, a month after returning the laptop, I received a call from someone identifying themselves as part of the company's external security audit team. They asked detailed questions about my work habits, when I typically logged in, how often I used the company VPN, whether I ever observed unusual behavior from the laptop. They seemed particularly interested in whether I used the machine during off hours or if it remained powered on overnight. I answered honestly, then asked why they were investigating. The auditor explained they were conducting routine security checks on all remote workers. The explanation seemed reasonable, but something in their tone felt rehearsed. A week later, I was called into a virtual meeting with HR and my department head. They explained that due to restructuring, my position was being eliminated. They offered a generous severance package in exchange for signing a confidentiality agreement covering not just company data, but also any observations about company equipment or security practices. The implication was clear. Take the money, stay quiet, move on. I signed the agreement. The severance would cover my expenses while I looked for new work. But I couldn't stop thinking about what had been happening. What had been on that laptop? What kind of data was being transmitted through my network in those early morning hours? My cybersecurity friend suggested a theory. The laptop had been compromised, not by an outside threat, but by someone inside the company. Perhaps someone in IT or security was using employee devices as relays for accessing dark web services, counting on the company's VPN and security software to mask their activities. The fact that the usage occurred only when I was home suggested the laptop might have been monitoring my presence, perhaps through the microphone detecting ambient noise or the webcam sensing light changes, to determine when it was safe to activate. In August, I found a new job with a different company. Remote work again, but this time I established strict boundaries. No equipment stays powered on after hours. Nothing connects to my home network without thorough vetting. I invested in a network firewall that logs and blocks suspicious activities. I should have felt secure again. I didn't. Last week, I received an anonymous email. The subject line contained only a timestamp, 1:17 a.m. The body was empty. I deleted it immediately and ran security scans on all my devices. Nothing unusual was detected. 3 days ago, while reviewing my new home security system footage, I noticed something strange. At exactly 1:17 a.m., the camera in my home office briefly lost connection, just for a few seconds, but long enough to create a gap in the recording. The system logs showed no errors, no power fluctuations, no explanation for the interruption. Yesterday, I received a package. No return address, no shipping label, no indication of how it had arrived at my door. Inside was a laptop, not a brand I recognized, with no manufacturer markings of any kind. Just a plain black case with a power button that emitted a soft blue glow. I haven't opened it, haven't connected it to power. It sits in my closet now, inside 3 layers of signal blocking material. I haven't told anyone about the package, haven't reported it to the police. Something tells me it wouldn't make a difference. Something tells me this isn't about me specifically. I'm just a node in a network, a convenient relay point for information traveling between unseen parties. Sometimes at night, I wake suddenly at 1:16 a.m., 1 minute before whatever this is activates. I lie in bed, listening to the silence of my apartment, waiting for that soft electronic tone I heard months ago. Sometimes I think I hear it, just at the edge of perception. Sometimes I convince myself it's just imagination. But the other night, I checked my network logs out of habit. At exactly 1:17 a.m. for precisely 3 minutes, an unknown device had connected to my network. The identifier was different this time. Not media server, but observer client. The data transfer was minimal, just a few kilobytes. Just enough to send a message. I'm still here. I'm still watching. I'm writing this now as a warning, though I'm not entirely sure what I'm warning against. Corporate espionage, government surveillance, organized criminal networks. The boundary between these possibilities seems increasingly blurred. All I know with certainty is that our digital lives are not as private as we imagine, our networks not as secure as we're led to believe. Something moves through the infrastructure we've built, using our connections, our devices, our homes as waypoints in a journey we can't see or understand. And sometimes, late at night, when the world is quiet, it pauses briefly at your address before continuing on its way. The archivist. I never meant to find anything illegal. I'm just a research assistant at the University of Durham, with a mediocre salary and a small flat in an unfashionable part of town. My job involves digitizing old manuscripts and helping doctoral students find obscure references. Hardly the sort of person who stumbles onto something dangerous. Or at least, that's what I thought. It started when I was helping Dr. Hargreaves with his research on digital privacy. He's been studying how technology has changed concepts of privacy since the 1990s. Most of his work involves surveys and interviews, but he was curious about the dark web, how anonymous spaces function, what sort of information gets shared there. Being twice my age and barely able to manage his university email, he asked me to help with the technical aspects. I should mention I'm not a computer expert by any stretch. I can navigate basic systems and know how to digitize documents properly, but that's about it. Still, compared to Dr. Hargreaves, I might as well have been a hacker. He gave me some search parameters and asked me to document what I found, all very academic, very above board. We had ethics approval and everything. I was to look for discussion forums, marketplaces, anything that might give insight into how people behave when they think no one's watching. But absolutely nothing illegal. Dr. Hargreaves was very clear about that. So I installed Tor and started exploring. Most of what I found was exactly what you'd expect. Drug markets, forums for people with extreme political views, sites selling counterfeit goods. Nothing particularly shocking if you spend any time reading about the dark web. After a couple weeks of this rather dull research, I stumbled onto a forum where people were discussing something called the archive. The way they talked about it was strange, deliberately vague, using what seemed like code words. They mentioned donations and submissions and viewing privileges. One user asked how to get an invitation, and someone replied that invitations were closed but occasionally opened when a curator vouched for someone. I probably would have moved on, but someone mentioned that the archive had material relevant to the University of Durham. That caught my attention. What could a seemingly secretive dark website have to do with my university? I created an account on the forum and asked about the archive's connection to Durham. I claimed to be a student interested in digital archives. A user with the handle Curator17 sent me a private message almost immediately. They asked specific questions about the university that only someone familiar with the campus would know. I answered truthfully. thinking this was just verification that I was actually from Durham. After a few exchanges, Curator 17 seemed satisfied and sent me a link, explaining it was a temporary invitation to the archive's waiting room. They said the full site required membership, but the waiting room would give me an idea of what the archive contained. The link led to a minimalist page with a black background and white text. There was a brief description explaining that the archive was a collection of authentic human experiences captured through direct observation. Below that was a preview section with thumbnail images, each labeled with a date and location. The first thumbnail I clicked showed a grainy image of what looked like a basement room. The caption noted it was from 3 months ago in Newcastle. I clicked to view it, expecting perhaps some kind of art project or documentary footage. What loaded instead made my stomach drop. It was a video of a person bound to a chair in a sparse room. Their face was obscured, but they were clearly in distress. A figure in a dark mask stood nearby, adjusting what looked like camera equipment. Text at the bottom indicated this was a preview only, and that full access requires membership verification and £5,000 initial donation. I closed the browser immediately, feeling physically ill. This had to be fake, right? One of those staged horror scenarios that people create for shock value. But something about the person's movements, the muffled sounds they made, it didn't seem like acting. I tried to convince myself it was just an elaborate hoax, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. The next day, I went back to the forum to see if there were any indications it wasn't real. I found a conversation where users were discussing recent additions to the archive. They talked about them like collectors discussing rare items, commenting on quality, uniqueness, production value. One comment in particular chilled me. A user complained that a recent subject from Leeds had expired too quickly, making the session disappointingly short. Another replied that the lead subject had a previously undisclosed heart condition and that they had improved their screening process since then. These people were talking about actual torture, possibly murder, and they were treating it like entertainment. I should have gone to the police immediately. That would have been the sensible thing to do. But I was worried about having accessed the site in the first place, even though I'd done so as part of approved research. And frankly, I wasn't sure the police would take it seriously. They'd probably assume it was fake, like most people would. Instead, I decided to gather more information first. I messaged Curator 17 again, pretending to be interested in gaining full access. I asked what the membership process involved. Their response was disturbingly professional. They explained that the archive operated on a tiered membership system. Basic access cost £5,000 annually, which allowed viewing of existing content. For £25,000, members could attend live streams and participate in voting on session parameters. For £100,000, members could submit subject recommendations and receive exclusive content. They then asked if I had experience with content creation, or if I was interested solely in viewing. I didn't know what to say, so I claimed I was just curious about viewing for now. They seemed disappointed, but said they could still process my application if I provided proof of funds and passed their verification process. I stopped responding after that. The whole thing felt too real, too organized to be some elaborate prank. I decided I needed to tell someone, but wasn't sure who. Going to my department head seemed risky. What if they questioned why I'd continued engaging after finding something clearly illegal? The police still seemed like they might not take it seriously without more evidence. That evening, I noticed a car parked across from my flat that I didn't recognize. A dark sedan with tinted windows. Probably nothing. There were often visitors to the building next door. but it made me uneasy. The next day at work, I received an email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line was simply, "The Archive." The message contained just one line: "We notice you haven't completed your application." I immediately checked the email headers. It had been sent to my personal email, not my university address. I'd never shared that email on the forum or with Curator 17. That night, the car was outside my building again. Same spot, same tinted windows. I drew my curtains and tried to convince myself I was being paranoid. The following morning, I arrived at my office to find Dr. Hargreaves waiting for me. He seemed agitated and asked if I'd made contact with anyone unusual during my research. Before I could answer, he handed me a printout of my conversation with Curator 17. Someone had sent it to his university email. I tried to explain that I'd been gathering information to determine if it was something we should report. He didn't seem angry, just deeply concerned. He said he'd received a phone call that morning from someone claiming to be with the university's cybersecurity team, asking about our research and specifically about me. When he'd asked for credentials, the caller had hung up. We agreed to go to the police together that afternoon. I felt relieved finally having someone else who understood the severity of what I'd found. Dr. Hargreaves said he needed to teach a morning lecture, but would meet me at the campus cafe at noon. He never showed up. After waiting 45 minutes, I called his office. His assistant said he'd cancelled his lecture due to illness and hadn't been seen on campus all day. I tried his mobile but got no answer. That's when I noticed a new email on my phone, another message from the same unknown address as before. This time it contained an attachment, a photo of Dr. Hargreaves entering his house that morning, taken from what appeared to be a car parked across the street. The message read, "Your professor seems unwell. Perhaps you should check on him." I called the police immediately. They took my report but didn't seem particularly alarmed. They said they'd send someone to check on Dr. Hargreaves and took my contact information. I didn't go home that night. I stayed with a friend from another department, someone completely unconnected to the research. I didn't tell them why I needed a place to stay, just that there was a problem with my heating. The police called the next morning. They'd found Dr. Hargreaves at home, perfectly fine. According to the officer, he seemed confused about why they were checking on him and denied cancelling his lecture or planning to meet me. He apparently told them I'd been acting strangely lately and might be under too much stress. That made no sense. I'd spoken to him just the day before. He'd shown me the printout, expressed concern about the strange call. Why would he deny it all, unless he hadn't been given a choice? I went to the university library and used a public computer to check the news. No reports of anything unusual happening at the university or involving Dr. Hargreaves. I tried to access the dark web forum again, but found it had been taken offline. The link to the archive's waiting room now led to a 404 error. As I was leaving the library, my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered without speaking. It was Dr. Hargreaves. His voice sounded strained, unnatural. He said he was concerned about my mental health and thought I should take some time off. Said he'd never shown me any printout or agreed to go to the police. Suggested perhaps I'd been spending too much time on the dark web and it was affecting my perception of reality. Before I could respond, he added that some colleagues from another university were interested in my research and would like to meet me. They could come to my flat that evening to discuss it. He ended the call before I could say anything. I didn't go home. I went to the train station and bought a ticket to London with cash. Once there, I checked into a small hotel in Paddington, also paying cash. I bought a new prepaid phone and turned off my regular one. That was 3 days ago. I've been moving between budget hotels since then, never staying more than one night. I've been checking the news obsessively for any mention of Dr. Hargreaves or anything unusual at Durham. Nothing so far. Yesterday, I worked up the courage to call Dr. Hargreaves' home number from my new phone. A woman answered, his wife. I asked to speak with him, not identifying myself. She said he was away at a conference in Amsterdam and wouldn't be back until next week. But I know for a fact he had no conference scheduled. I'd helped him with his calendar just last month. I don't know what to do now. Going to the police seems pointless. They already think I'm unstable based on whatever Dr. Hargreaves told them. I have no evidence. The forum is gone, the waiting room link dead. All I have is a story that sounds like paranoid delusion. I keep thinking about those thumbnail images, about the casual way the forum users discuss people suffering, about how organized it all seemed, the tears, the verification process, the careful screening. And I keep wondering about that connection to Durham. Was it just a coincidence that the archive had material related to my university? Or was there some deeper connection that I stumbled upon without realizing it? Sometimes I consider trying to find the archive again to gather actual evidence. But then I remember the car outside my flat, the email with Dr. Hargreaves' photo, the strange phone call. I check the news every few hours, dreading seeing a missing person report for Dr. Hargreaves, or worse, for myself. I've started looking at flights to other countries. Maybe getting far away is my only option now. The most disturbing thought is that the archive might be more than just a hidden corner of the dark web. What if it has connections to people with real influence? People who can make a police report disappear, or convince a respected academic to suddenly change his story. I don't know how long I can keep moving around like this. My savings won't last forever. Eventually, I'll have to stop running and face whatever is coming for me. But when I close my eyes at night, all I can see are those thumbnails. All I can think about are the people in those videos and how no one knows what happened to them. No one except the viewers who pay to watch. I never thought I'd be the type of person to get mixed up in something like this. Most people wouldn't. That's the thing about curiosity. It starts innocently enough. A random link shared in a forum. A passing comment about the dark web that piques your interest. For me, it began with an article I read about internet privacy and security. The author mentioned Tor browsers and onion routing almost as an afterthought. I didn't even know what those things were at the time. I'm a network engineer by trade. My days revolve around making sure corporate systems stay operational, patching vulnerabilities, monitoring traffic patterns. Nothing extraordinary. Just another tech guy with a modest apartment, a decent salary, and too much free time on his hands. Maybe that's why I installed the Tor browser that night. Professional development, I told myself. Good to understand how these things work. The first few days exploring the dark web were disappointingly mundane. Forums discussing privacy rights, marketplaces selling things I had no interest in, dead links, slow loading times. It was like visiting the internet of the early 2000s, minus the charm. I was about to uninstall the whole thing when I stumbled across a thread discussing something called red rooms. The concept seemed absurd at first. Live streaming platforms where viewers could watch and even direct acts of violence against unwilling participants. Urban legends, I thought. Internet boogeyman stories to scare the uninitiated. Most people in the thread seemed to agree. They were myths, impossible to operate given bandwidth limitations and the technical difficulties of secure streaming. A few individuals insisted they existed, but provided no evidence, no links. Then someone posted coordinates. Not a web address, but a string of characters, numbers, and symbols that meant nothing to me. Someone else responded with a single word. The thread went quiet after that. I copied the string. I shouldn't have done that. Everything would be different if I had just closed the browser right then. It took me 3 days to figure out what to do with those characters. The solution came from an obscure subforum where users discuss cryptographic methods. The string was a key of sorts, one that had to be entered into a specific field on a specific site at a specific time. The kind of complexity that made me think there really was something to hide. I found the site. A blank page with a single input field. Nothing to indicate what it was for. No text, no images. Just an empty box waiting to be filled. I hesitated before pasting in the string. This was the moment I should have walked away. Something about the sterility of that page felt wrong in a way I couldn't articulate. The cursor blinked rhythmically in the empty field, patient, expectant, waiting for me to make a mistake I couldn't undo. The first sign that I had done something irreversible was the sudden change in my network traffic. I monitor my home network obsessively. Occupational habit. The data pattern shifted, connections multiplying through nodes I couldn't identify. This wasn't normal Tor behavior. My system was being mapped, examined, catalogued by something on the other end. Each packet of data felt like fingers probing through my digital walls, searching for weaknesses, memorizing the layout of my network, of my life. Then the page changed. A loading icon. A countdown timer set to 20 minutes. Nothing else. I waited, telling myself I could close the browser at any time. I didn't. The seconds ticked away, each one dragging longer than the last. My mouth went dry, sweat beaded along my hairline. Still, I waited. Some terrible gravity held me there, unable or unwilling to turn away from what was coming. When the timer reached 0, the stream began. The video quality was surprisingly good. High definition, minimal latency. The room shown was simple. White walls, concrete floor with a drain in the center. A single chair bolted to the floor, empty, waiting. The emptiness of that room hummed with potential violence. The drain in the floor promised the necessity of easy cleaning. The bolted chair spoke of resistance that needed to be overcome. A chat window appeared beside the video feed. Users with alphanumeric names filled the space with scrolling text. I didn't participate, just watched the conversations scroll by. They discussed preferences, made requests. Some offered payment in cryptocurrency. Others seemed to have credit of some kind already established. The casual nature of their communications made my skin crawl. The banality of their anticipation, the everyday commerce of atrocity. I should have left then, but a terrible curiosity kept me watching. In my defense, part of me still believed this was elaborate theater. Dark web performance art designed to shock and disturb. It couldn't be real. The alternative was too monstrous to contemplate. A door opened somewhere off camera. A figure entered the frame, face obscured by a featureless white mask. They wore simple clothes, black pants, grey shirt, latex gloves, nothing remarkable or identifiable. They looked directly at the camera and held up a piece of paper with a string of characters, a verification code of some kind. Proof that this was happening now, not pre-recorded. The blank mask stared into the camera, into my eyes, as if the person behind it could see me watching, could identify me through the screen. The chat erupted with activity. The masked figure put the paper down and left the frame briefly, returning with someone else. A person with a hood over their head, hands bound behind their back. They were guided to the chair, secured with restraints at the ankles, wrists, and across the torso. The hood remained. The chat began specifying activities. I won't detail what was requested. I won't detail what happened next. I closed the stream after 3 minutes and 17 seconds. Not nearly fast enough. I uninstalled Tor, ran security sweeps on my system, and tried to convince myself I had witnessed an elaborate hoax. But the sound stayed with me, the movements, the knowledge that somewhere, in some hidden corner of the world, that room existed, that chair, that drain. 3 days later, I noticed something unusual about my home network. New devices connecting briefly, then disappearing. Strange traffic patterns in the early morning hours, when I should have been the only one active. Someone had compromised my security. Someone had access. The intrusion felt intimate, violating in ways I couldn't fully process. My private space, my data, my life, all exposed to unknown observers. I changed all my passwords, reconfigured my router, installed new firewalls. The intrusions continued, more sophisticated now, avoiding the measures I put in place. Whoever it was had considerable skill, or resources, or both. Each time I implemented a new security measure, they adapted, evolved, found new pathways into my systems. It became a game of chess where I could only see my own pieces, never my opponent's. A week after viewing the stream, I received an email from an address consisting of random characters. The subject line was the same verification code I had seen on the piece of paper in the video. The body of the email contained a single line about viewers becoming participants eventually. I deleted the email, reported it as phishing, told myself it was automated, sent to everyone who had accessed the stream. Nothing personal, nothing targeted. But my hands shook as I clicked the delete button. My breath came in short, shallow gasps. I knew. Some part of me already knew. Then the real messages started arriving. Direct messages to accounts I hadn't shared with anyone. My private phone number, my work email. All with the same theme. They knew who I was. They knew where I lived. They knew my routines. Each message included proof. A photo of my apartment building taken that day, a screenshot of my calendar, a list of my recent purchases. The level of detail grew more invasive with each communication. What I ate for breakfast, which route I took to work, how long I spent in the shower. The final message came with an attachment, a floor plan of my apartment with an X marked beside my bed. The message informed me that my stream would begin soon, and participants were already bidding. The clinical precision of the threat made it worse somehow. No emotion, no sadness, just process, procedure, industry. I went to the police, tried to explain without incriminating myself. They took notes, offered to send a patrol car by my building, suggested I was being targeted by standard identity thieves. They didn't understand, couldn't understand without seeing what I had seen. The bored expressions on their faces as I tried to convey the danger made me realize how alone I truly was. I stayed in a hotel that night, paid in cash, used a fake name, didn't bring any devices with me, just sat in the room with the chain on the door, watching the parking lot through a gap in the curtains. Nothing happened. No one came. Hours stretched into eternity as I waited for a threat that never materialized. Sleep came in brief, restless intervals, interrupted by the slightest sounds from neighboring rooms or the hallway outside. I returned home the next day, convinced I had overreacted. The apartment was exactly as I had left it. No signs of entry, No disturbance. I ran more security scans, changed the locks, installed a camera system. Life began to feel normal again as days passed without incident, but the normalcy felt thin, fragile, like ice forming over a dark lake. I went through the motions of my routine while constantly looking over my shoulder, checking reflections in windows, scanning crowds for watching eyes. 2 weeks later, as I was falling asleep, I heard a notification sound from my phone. A new email, the verification code as the subject line again. The body contained a link and words about my viewership making something possible. I didn't click the link, deleted the email immediately, blocked the sender, tried to go back to sleep. The darkness of my bedroom seemed deeper somehow, the shadows more substantial. My heartbeat echoed in my ears, too loud, too fast. Sleep retreated beyond my reach. That's when I heard the knock at my door. Not a pounding or frantic banging, just 3 measured, deliberate knocks. Professional, patient. The sound cut through the silence of my apartment with surgical precision. My entire body went rigid, paralyzed by the confirmation of my worst fears. I checked the camera feed on my phone. No one appeared on the screen. Just an empty hallway. The emptiness seemed wrong somehow, unnatural, as if the space itself had been hollowed out. Reality thinned to allow something through. Another knock. Same pattern, same deliberate pacing. The sound seemed to reverberate through my bones, setting my teeth on edge. The empty hallway on my phone screen made no sense. The knocking made no sense. Nothing made sense anymore. I called the police, whispering my address, explaining there was someone at my door. They promised to send someone, asked if I could stay on the line. I agreed, keeping my voice low. The dispatcher's voice in my ear provided a tenuous connection to normality, to safety. I clung to it even as another set of knocks came. The knocking came a 3rd time. I moved as quietly as I could to the door, looked through the peephole. The hallway was empty, not just unoccupied, but empty in a way that defied explanation. The familiar corridor seemed distorted, stretched, as if viewed through warped glass. And still, no one visible who could be causing the sound. A 4th knock, right in front of me. Impossible, with no one there. The sound now originating centimeters from my face. I could feel the vibration of it through the door, against my forehead pressed to the peephole. A knock from nothing, from nowhere, from no one. I backed away from the door, explained to the dispatcher what was happening. They asked me to verify my address again, told me units were 3 minutes away. Their voice sounded distant now, underwater, unreachable, the connection failing as reality unraveled around me. The knocking stopped. My phone chimed with a new notification, a text message from my own number informing me they were already inside. The words glowed on the screen, impossible yet undeniable. The air in the apartment changed, grew heavier, charged with presence. No longer alone, no longer safe, never safe again. The police arrived 8 minutes later. They found the door locked, chained from the inside. When no one answered their knocks, they broke the door down. The apartment was empty, no signs of struggle, no evidence anyone had been there besides me. Just my phone on the floor, screen shattered, and a piece of paper beside it with that same verification code. The police report noted nothing unusual beyond an abandoned residence, a missing person case with no leads, no witnesses, no evidence of foul play. Just another digital ghost, forgotten as screens scroll to the next distraction. I'm told they're still looking for me, friends, family, co-workers. They've all received messages from my accounts saying I needed some time away, that I'd be back soon. The messages, include details only I would know, use phrases and expressions specific to me. Perfect digital forgeries maintaining the illusion that I still exist in the world I once knew. They aren't from me. I don't know where I am. The room has white walls, concrete floor with a drain in the center, a single chair that I'm secured to. There's a camera mounted in the corner, its red light constantly on, watching, streaming. The light never blinks, never wavers. A mechanical eye broadcasting my existence to unseen watchers. Sometimes I hear notifications through the walls. Sounds like bids being placed. Sounds like viewers making requests. The same commerce I once witnessed now cycles back to me. The drain in the floor waits patiently. The restraints hold firm. The door remains closed but will open soon. I know what's coming. I've seen this stream before. The other side of the screen now. The other side of the mask. Participant, no longer viewer. If you're reading this, it's because someone wants my story shared. A warning, perhaps. Or an advertisement. The truth doesn't matter anymore. Only the stream matters. Only the viewers matter. Be careful what you look for online. Be careful what you allow yourself to witness. The line between viewer and participant is thinner than you think. A membrane easily punctured. A boundary easily crossed. And if you hear that measured knock at your door someday, don't answer. Story 8. Compression Artifacts. I never intended to find it. Most people who stumble onto the darker corners of the internet are actively looking, following breadcrumbs of urban legends and whispered rumors. Not me. I was just doing my job. I work in digital forensics for an insurance company. Nothing glamorous, mostly analyzing data from car accident claims, verifying timestamps on property damage photos, that sort of thing. Occasionally, we get cases involving potential fraud, where someone might have manipulated evidence. That's what led me down this particular rabbit hole. A claim had come in for a high-end electronics store that had allegedly been robbed. The security camera footage showed masked figures breaking in after hours and methodically clearing out the most valuable merchandise. Standard stuff. But something about the video felt off to me. The timestamps were consistent. The metadata looked normal. But certain compression artifacts appeared in patterns that didn't match typical security camera encoding. I've spent enough time analyzing video to recognize when something's been processed through multiple systems. This footage had signatures suggesting it had been routed through some kind of streaming service before being downloaded and submitted as evidence. Again, not necessarily suspicious on its own. Many modern security systems upload to cloud servers automatically, but combined with a few other anomalies, it merited deeper investigation. I traced the video's digital fingerprint backward, following a trail of encoding signatures and network markers. The insurance company gives us considerable technical leeway when investigating potential fraud, so I had access to specialized tools and databases not available to the general public. What I expected to find was evidence that the footage had been staged, perhaps an inside job disguised as a break-in. What I found instead was a pathway leading to a closed network operating through a series of proxy servers and encryption layers. The security footage hadn't just been processed through standard cloud storage. It had been live streamed to a private audience before being repurposed as evidence for the insurance claim. Professional curiosity got the better of me. I followed the digital trail, using access tools that technically fell within my job description, but definitely pushed ethical boundaries. After 3 days of careful tracing, I found myself looking at an unmarked website accessible only through specialized routing protocols. The landing page was minimal, just a login screen with no company name, no graphics, no identifying information of any kind. Using analytical techniques that I'd rather not detail, I managed to access the site's back-end database. What I found was a sophisticated streaming platform with hundreds of active feeds organized into categories. Most feeds showed empty rooms, parked cars, streetscapes, or other mundane settings. Each had viewership metrics, timestamping, and user interaction logs. This wasn't some amateur operation. It was a professional-grade surveillance network with global reach. One category caught my attention: scheduled events. Unlike the passive surveillance feeds, these had specific start times, viewer registration requirements, and something called interaction parameters. The most recent scheduled event had occurred the previous night, with the cryptic title Inventory Reduction Phase 3. When I checked the archived footage, I found myself watching the same robbery that had been submitted in our insurance claim. The implications hit me all at once. This wasn't footage of an actual robbery. This was something staged specifically for an audience, filmed to appear like security camera footage, then repurposed as evidence for a fraudulent insurance claim. The thieves were performers. The stolen merchandise was probably moved out through legitimate channels, while the insurance company paid for the supposed loss. Clever as far as fraud schemes go, but what disturbed me more was the viewership data. 63 people had watched this staged robbery live, many paying significant amounts in cryptocurrency for the privilege. The interactive log showed viewers sending real-time messages suggesting how the thieves should behave, which items to take, whether to vandalize the space, how to position themselves for better camera angles. I should have reported my findings immediately, compiled the evidence for our fraud investigation team, and moved on. Instead, I kept digging, curious about the other scheduled events in the system. Most had innocuous titles that gave little indication of their content. Night Shift Protocol, Wellness Check 17, Conditioning Session. The viewership numbers varied from as few as 10 to over 100, with corresponding price tiers. The next scheduled event was something called Home Evaluation Series, Residence 28, set to begin at 1 a.m. the following night. Against every ethical guideline and professional standard, I decided to observe it. I told myself it was necessary for building a comprehensive fraud case. In reality, I was simply curious. A curiosity I've regretted every day since. I took precautions, using a secured connection and routing through multiple proxies. At 12:55 a.m., I accessed the platform and found the upcoming stream already had 47 registered viewers. A countdown timer showed 5 minutes remaining. The preview image displayed what looked like ordinary home security camera footage of a living room. Sofa, television, coffee table. Typical suburban decor. Nothing unusual or particularly interesting. At exactly 1 a.m., the stream went live. The initial view showed the living room from a corner ceiling perspective, mimicking standard home security positioning. For several minutes, nothing happened. The empty room, dimly lit by a small lamp, remained still and silent. The viewership count ticked up to 53. A text interface at the bottom of the screen showed viewers sending messages, most expressing anticipation or discussing technical aspects of the camera setup. At 1:08 a.m., a new camera angle activated, showing what appeared to be a bedroom. A person was sleeping in the bed, unaware of being observed by dozens of strangers. The camera angle was positioned to show the entire room, with particular focus on the bedroom door and window. Again, Messages scrolled as viewers discussed the setting, the subject, and something they referred to as entry methods. With growing discomfort, I realized I was watching someone's actual home, accessed through their own security system, without their knowledge. The viewers weren't just passive observers. They were actively discussing how to enter this residence. This wasn't entertainment. It was premeditation. At 1:17 a.m., a third camera angle activated, showing the exterior of the house, specifically the back door and patio area. A figure in dark clothing appeared at the edge of the frame, moving carefully toward the door. Messages from viewers increased rapidly, many sending specific instructions about the lock mechanism based on what they could see in the high-definition footage. I was witnessing the planning and execution of a home invasion being live-streamed to paying viewers who were actively participating in the process. This went far beyond insurance fraud or staged robberies. This was real, happening in real time, to an unsuspecting victim. I frantically tried to identify the location, searching for any distinguishing features in the footage. Street signs through windows, mail with an address, anything that could help me alert authorities. But the camera angles were carefully chosen to avoid revealing identifying details. The only geographic clue was a weather alert visible on a phone screen on the nightstand, suggesting a location somewhere in the Pacific Northwest. As the figure began working on the back door lock, I made a decision. I had to report this immediately, even if it meant admitting I had accessed the platform without authorization. I disconnected from the stream and called the FBI's cyber division. Using an anonymous reporting system, I provided everything I had: the network pathways, access methods, descriptions of what I'd witnessed, and the connection to our insurance fraud case. The next morning, I arrived at work to find 2 federal agents waiting in our company's security office. For 3 hours, they questioned me about how I had discovered the streaming platform, what I had observed, and whether I had participated in any way beyond viewing. They seemed less interested in the home invasion I had reported and more focused on the broader network infrastructure. They took custody of all my research materials and requested I not discuss the matter with anyone else while their investigation proceeded. That evening, I searched news sources for any reports of a home invasion in the Pacific Northwest. Nothing appeared that matched what I had witnessed. Either it hadn't made the news, hadn't actually occurred, or it happened somewhere entirely different than I had assumed. 2 days later, I received an email from an address consisting only of numbers. The subject line read, "Viewer Analytics Report." The message contained a single line of text: "Your observation patterns have been flagged for review." Attached was a detailed file analyzing my viewing behavior during the brief time I had accessed the platform. How long I had watched each camera angle, which parts of the frame my cursor had hovered over, timestamps of when I had been active versus idle. It concluded with an assessment that I displayed intervention probability indicators that made me an unsuitable viewing participant. The precision of this analysis was chilling. Whatever system they were using could track not just that I had viewed the stream, but exactly how I had engaged with it, right down to my mouse movements and hesitations. They knew I wasn't a genuine customer. They knew I was likely to report what I had seen. I changed all my passwords, reformatted my work computer, and swept my home for surveillance devices. I found nothing unusual, but the feeling of being monitored persisted. A week passed without incident. The federal agents didn't contact me again. The anonymous email address sent nothing further. Our fraud investigation proceeded without any mention of what I had discovered. I began to wonder if I had overreacted. Perhaps the streaming platform was actually some elaborate role-playing game where participants pretended to plan crimes. Perhaps the home and its sleeping occupant were staged setups with paid actors, like the electronics store robbery. Such an explanation wouldn't make it legal, but it would at least be less immediately dangerous. Then the photographs arrived. Standard 4x6 prints in a plain white envelope, no return address, delivered to my apartment mailbox. 5 photos in total. The first showed me entering my workplace, taken from what appeared to be a security camera across the street. The second showed me at a coffee shop I frequented, captured from the shop's own surveillance system. The third was me getting into my car in a grocery store parking lot. The fourth showed the exterior of my apartment building. The fifth photo showed me asleep in my bed, taken from an angle high in the corner of my bedroom. I have no security cameras in my apartment, no webcams positioned where that photo could have been taken, no devices with cameras directed toward my bed. Yet there it was, proof that someone had been watching me sleep, just as I had watched a stranger sleep through that live stream. I went to the police, showed them the photos, explained the situation. They took a report, checked my apartment for signs of breaking and entering, found nothing disturbed. No evidence of how the bedroom photo had been taken. They suggested installing better locks, getting a security system, being more aware of my surroundings. Standard advice that completely missed the point of what was happening. Over the next few weeks, more envelopes arrived. Each contained a single photo showing me in situations where I believed I was unobserved. Reading on my balcony, showering, captured from outside the bathroom window, working late at my desk. Each photo had a timestamp and a viewership count printed in the bottom corner. Apparently, 16 people had watched me shower. 23 had observed me sleeping. 31 had seen me working at my desk. I moved to a different apartment, changed jobs, altered my appearance, and adjusted my routine. The photos kept coming, now delivered to my new address. Sometimes they would arrive within hours of being taken, proving they weren't the result of long-term surveillance, but active, ongoing observation. The most recent envelope arrived yesterday. Instead of photographs, it contained a small card with a printed message. Home Evaluation Series, Residence 43, scheduled for 1 a.m. Estimated viewers, 58 primary subject. U interaction parameters extended. Below this was a link to the streaming platform I had discovered months ago. I'm not going to be in my apartment at 1 a.m. tonight. I won't be anywhere they can easily find me. I've disabled or disposed of anything that could potentially be used to track my location. This message was typed on a public computer, and I'll be somewhere else entirely by the time anyone reads it. I still don't fully understand what I've stumbled into. Some kind of voyeuristic network that repurposes security systems for entertainment. A criminal organization that combines surveillance with burglary and fraud. Something with even darker purposes that I haven't yet discerned. What I do know is that in this system, the distinction between observer and observed is fluid. Today's viewer becomes tomorrow's unwitting performer. The cameras that make us feel secure are the same ones that make us vulnerable. And somewhere out there right now, someone is watching footage of ordinary people in supposedly private moments, never realizing that they themselves are being watched through the very screen they're using to observe others. The most disturbing part isn't that I'm being monitored. It's the realization that I probably always was. The platform I discovered didn't create this surveillance network. It merely monetized what already existed. Our world is saturated with cameras we've willingly installed, with devices that listen and watch, with systems designed to track our movements and behaviors. We've built our own panopticon and called it convenience, called it security, called it connection. I don't know who will be watching at 1 a.m. tonight. I don't know what extended interaction parameters means in this context, but I do know that whatever happens, it will be recorded, categorized, and stored for future viewers. Another node in an ever-expanding network of observed moments. And somewhere in that database is footage of me watching someone else, unaware that I was already part of the performance. Story 5. Signal loss. The first thing you should know is that my family has always been careful. Our father worked in data security for 30 years, so internet safety wasn't just casual advice in our household, it was doctrine. We used VPNs before most people knew what they were. We covered webcams with tape. We treated public Wi-Fi like contaminated water. We weren't paranoid, just realistic about digital vulnerabilities. Growing up this way, I learned to navigate online spaces with caution, even if I never fully understood the technical details behind our family protocols. That's what makes everything that happened so ironic. It wasn't me who ventured into dangerous digital territory. It was my sister Mia, the careful one, the one who majored in cybersecurity before switching to journalism. Mia, who lectured me about password hygiene and regularly sent me articles about privacy breaches. Mia, who disappeared exactly 72 hours after telling me she had found something that would change how people understand the internet. The police found nothing useful. Her apartment was undisturbed, almost suspiciously so. Bed made, dishes washed, everything in perfect order. Her phone sat on her nightstand, deliberately powered off, rather than dead. Her laptop was gone. Security footage showed her entering her building on Tuesday evening, face obscured by her usual baseball cap, worn specifically to avoid facial recognition. No footage showed her leaving. By Friday morning, when she missed our weekly coffee meetup, I knew something was wrong. By Friday afternoon, when she missed her call with our parents, we all did. The weeks following her disappearance became a blur of police interviews, searching her apartment repeatedly, putting up flyers, and creating social media campaigns. The detective assigned to her case was sympathetic, but overwhelmed with other cases. After the first month, the updates became less frequent, the leads non-existent. By March, it felt like we were the only ones still actively looking. That's when I decided to examine her work more closely. Mia had been investigating technology-related stories for the past year. Data privacy concerns, corporate surveillance, emerging tech ethics. Nothing that seemed particularly dangerous or controversial. But as I went through her published articles, I noticed a pattern in her recent work: increased focus on digital encryption, anonymous networks, and references to something called invitation-only forums. Her last published piece mentioned research into the modern digital underground, but provided few specifics. I reached out to her editor, who seemed reluctant to discuss her unfinished work. After persistent questioning, he finally admitted that Mia had been working on a series about dark web marketplaces, specifically focusing on the myths and realities of what she called pay-per-view trauma. He claimed he had discouraged the project, believing it was both journalistically dubious and potentially unsafe. Mia had insisted on continuing her research, promising to be careful and maintain anonymity online. With this information, I contacted a friend from college who worked in cybersecurity. He hesitated when I explained what I needed, but my desperation must have been obvious. He agreed to help me access Mia's online accounts, though he made it clear he was only doing this because it involved a missing person. Mia's email gave us little to work with, mostly routine correspondence, subscription newsletters, and communications with known sources. Her cloud storage contained research for published articles, but nothing about her current project. It was her browser history that provided our first real lead. Although she had apparently cleared it regularly, the synced data from her accounts showed repeated visits to forums discussing anonymous browsing techniques, cryptocurrency transactions, and secure communication methods. My cybersecurity friend showed me how to safely install a Tor browser and access some of the sites Mia had visited. Most were surprisingly mundane: privacy-focused discussion boards, whistleblower information exchanges, and academic research repositories. But one recurring address stood out: an alphanumeric string ending in .onion that Mia had visited multiple times in the weeks before her disappearance. My friend couldn't access it directly. It required login credentials we didn't have. I spent the next several weeks learning everything I could about dark web navigation, cryptocurrency, and secure communication protocols. I created anonymous accounts on the forums Mia had frequented, carefully asking questions about the mysterious .onion address. Most users ignored me. Some warned me to stop asking. One sent a private message claiming the address belonged to a site called The Viewing Room, describing it as a place where everything has a price, especially the truth. This user, who went by the handle Perennial Watcher, claimed to have information about my sister, though they never specified how they knew we were connected. They offered to help me access the viewing room, but only if I agreed to their conditions. I would need to make a cryptocurrency payment, use only their recommended security measures, and promise never to reveal their involvement. The whole exchange felt dangerous, potentially illegal, but my desperation overwhelmed my caution. I agreed. The instructions arrived the next day: elaborate security protocols, specific times to attempt access, and a cryptocurrency wallet address for payment. The amount translated to roughly $500. I followed every step precisely, making the payment and downloading additional security software. 3 days later, I received login credentials and detailed instructions for accessing the viewing room. The site itself was minimalist: black background, simple text navigation, no graphics. The main page displayed only a welcome message and a membership tier system ranging from observer to director. My credentials gave me observer access, apparently the lowest level. This tier allowed viewing of archived sessions, but no participation in live events. A counter in the corner showed 37 current users online. The archive section contained dozens of video files organized by date. Each had a clinical title format, a number followed by a letter designation and timestamp. No descriptions, no previews. With trembling fingers, I clicked on the most recent file. The video showed a simple room with white walls. A person sat in a chair facing the camera, their face obscured by digital blurring. They held a card with a date and time from 2 weeks earlier, presumably proving the video's authenticity. For several minutes, nothing happened. Then text appeared on screen, apparently messages from viewers asking for specific actions. The blurred figure would comply with simple requests: raising a hand, displaying a newspaper, turning to show different angles of the room. The video ended after approximately 20 minutes. I watched several more videos, all following the same pattern. Different rooms, different blurred figures, but the same basic concept: viewers making requests, subjects complying. Nothing overtly violent or disturbing, just strangely clinical and detached. I couldn't understand why this would interest Mia journalistically, nor why accessing such content would put her in danger. Then I noticed a search function. With growing unease, I entered Mia's name. No results. I tried various keywords related to her: journalist, reporter, investigation. Nothing. Finally, in desperation, I searched for the date of her disappearance. 3 results appeared. I selected the first file, dated the night Mia went missing. The video began like the others. A white room, a chair, a blurred figure holding the date card. But something about the person's posture, the way they held themselves, triggered a visceral recognition. Despite the digital obscuring, I knew I was looking at my sister. The realization hit me physically, a wave of nausea and dizziness that nearly caused me to black out. When I steadied myself and focused again on the screen, the video had progressed. Mia remained seated, responding to viewer instructions. Text messages scrolled alongside the video. Usernames I didn't recognize, making requests that grew increasingly personal. They asked about her work, her investigation, what she knew about the viewing room. Mia's responses were not audible. All videos on the site played without sound. But I could see her speaking, her body language becoming more tense as the session continued. Approximately 15 minutes into the video, a new username appeared in the chat: Director Prime. Their message was simple: interview concluded. Proceeding to assessment phase. The tenor of the chat changed immediately, messages coming rapidly with single-word responses: breach, compromise, liability, confirmed. A final message from Director Prime appeared: consensus reached, signal termination approved. The video ended abruptly. I immediately clicked on the second search result, dated 1 day later. This video showed the same room but empty. The third video, dated 1 week after her disappearance, displayed only a black screen with text: asset containment complete. Archive restricted to Tier 3 and above. I sat in stunned silence, trying to process what I had seen. The clinical detachment of the interface, the bureaucratic language of the chat, the implication of what signal termination might mean. It all pointed to something organized, systematic, and terrifying. This wasn't random violence or opportunistic crime. This was something that operated with rules, procedures, consensus decisions. I tried to access additional information, searching for Director Prime or any of the other usernames I had seen in the chat. Each attempt was met with an access denied message. After approximately 30 minutes of increasingly frantic searching, my screen went black, replaced by a single line of text: observer status revoked, connection terminated. I immediately contacted my cybersecurity friend, explaining what I had found. His reaction was grave concern, not just for Mia, but for my safety as well. He insisted on coming over, bringing equipment to secure my devices and network. While waiting for him to arrive, I received an email from an address consisting only of numbers. The subject line was observation notice. The body contained 3 lines of text: your access to restricted archives has been logged. Your connection to subject 47J has been confirmed. Your status has been updated to person of interest. Below this was an image, a still frame from what appeared to be a security camera, showing the exterior of my apartment building. The timestamp was from 10 minutes earlier. My friend arrived 30 minutes later, immediately disconnecting my router and checking my apartment for unknown devices. He found nothing obvious, but explained that if the people behind the viewing room were as sophisticated as they appeared, they might have capabilities beyond what we could easily detect. He suggested I leave my apartment immediately, use only cash, and avoid any devices connected to my name or accounts. I spent the next several weeks moving between budget hotels. using public computers for limited online activities, and trying to decide what to do. Going to the police seemed logical, but what evidence did I have? A website I had accessed illegally, videos that no longer existed in any form I could share, and an email that had disappeared from the temporary account I had been using. Even if they believed me, what could they investigate? Eventually, I contacted a journalist from a major newspaper who specialized in technology and privacy issues. Without revealing my identity, I shared what I had discovered about the viewing room, emphasizing my sister's disappearance and the apparent organization behind the site. The journalist was cautious but interested, asking detailed questions and requesting any documentation I could provide. 3 days after this contact, the journalist's social media accounts went silent. A week later, a brief notice appeared in the newspaper's staff section, stating they had taken a leave of absence for personal reasons. My attempts to re-establish contact went unanswered. That was 2 months ago. I've since returned to my normal life, or the appearance of it. I go to work, maintain my routine, use my regular devices, but I've installed every security measure recommended by my increasingly paranoid cybersecurity friend. I use different phones regularly. I sweep my apartment for surveillance devices daily. I watch for patterns, for people who appear too frequently in my periphery. Sometimes I convince myself it was all an elaborate hoax, a twisted prank or scam, targeting people searching for missing loved ones. Sometimes I believe Mia stumbled onto something real, something organized and dangerous that operates in plain sight through our digital infrastructure. Most days, I fluctuate between these possibilities, unable to settle on which is more terrifying. Last week, I received a package containing Mia's laptop. No return address, no note. The device powered on normally but had been wiped clean. Factory settings restored, no personal data remaining. The only new file was a text document containing a single line. Investigation closed. Signal terminated. Observers reassigned. Yesterday, I noticed a new Wi-Fi network appearing intermittently near my apartment. The name changes but always follows the same pattern. A number, followed by a letter designation, followed by observer. It appears strongest late at night, when the building is quiet. Sometimes when I can't sleep, I watch my device list and see unknown connections attempting to join my network. Each attempt lasts exactly 47 seconds before disappearing. I don't know if Mia is alive. I don't know who operates the viewing room or what their purpose truly is. I don't know if they're private citizens, criminal organizations, or something with governmental connections. What I do know is that somewhere right now, someone is watching through a screen as another person holds up today's date on a card. Somewhere decisions are being made about who constitutes a liability. Somewhere a consensus is being reached. And increasingly, I feel like I'm sitting in a white room, my face obscured to viewers I cannot see, waiting for the moment when my signal too is terminated. Story 10. Audience participation. The whole thing started because I was bored. That sounds trivial, almost embarrassingly so, but it's the truth. 6 months of unemployment after a decade at the same marketing firm had left me restless. Days blurred together in my small apartment. Job applications vanished into the digital void. My savings dwindled. The monotony became almost physically painful, a constant dull pressure behind my eyes. I've never been particularly tech-savvy. I use social media, stream movies, shop online, the usual things. But one night, scrolling through an obscure forum discussing internet privacy, I saw a comment that caught my attention. Someone mentioned how easy it was to access what they called the hidden web using certain browsers and protocols. They described communities and content unavailable through standard search engines. The way they wrote about it made it sound like an exclusive club, a digital speakeasy hiding in plain sight. Maybe it was the isolation talking, or just the human desire to access spaces marked forbidden. But I decided to explore. I installed the specialized browser, followed basic tutorials, and found myself navigating a parallel internet, slower, less polished, but intriguing in its obscurity. Most sites were underwhelming. Text-heavy forums discussing privacy rights, cryptocurrency exchanges, marketplaces for things I had no interest in purchasing. Nothing particularly shocking or compelling. After a week of casual browsing, I stumbled across a forum dedicated to what users called immersive experiences. The discussion revolved around live streams of various scenarios, some mundane, others more extreme. Members debated the authenticity of different streams, sharing technical criteria for distinguishing staged content from genuine footage. Many contributors seemed to be chasing something they called the real thing, dismissing most available streams as elaborate fiction designed to separate viewers from their cryptocurrency. One username appeared consistently in these discussions: Veritas Proxy. Unlike other members who argued passionately about which streams were authentic, Veritas Proxy maintained an analytical detachment, discussing viewer psychology more than content authenticity. They wrote about how the perception of reality affected viewer engagement, regardless of whether the content was staged. Their posts read like academic research rather than entertainment reviews. After observing silently for several days, I sent Veritas Proxy a private message, expressing curiosity about these immersive experiences they analyze so clinically. I expected to be ignored, or perhaps dismissed as a novice. Instead, I received a detailed response explaining different categories of live streams available through anonymous networks. Most were indeed staged productions masquerading as authentic footage, Veritas Proxy explained, but they still satisfied a psychological need for viewers to feel they were accessing something forbidden, something real. We exchanged several messages discussing the appeal of these experiences. I found myself drawn into conversation with this stranger, perhaps because they engaged with me more meaningfully than anyone had in months. When Veritas Proxy offered to show me what they considered a genuinely immersive stream, something beyond the amateur productions flooding anonymous platforms, I accepted without much hesitation. They sent coordinates, not a web address in the traditional sense, but a string of characters and numbers that meant nothing to me. Veritas Proxy included instructions for accessing a platform called the Observatory at a specific time that night. The stream would begin at precisely 2 a.m., they explained, and first-time viewers were granted limited access without payment. If I found the experience valuable, future viewings would require cryptocurrency contributions. That night, I followed the instructions precisely, navigating through several layers of security to reach a minimalist page with a black background and simple interface. A countdown timer showed 17 minutes until the stream would begin. A small counter in the corner indicated 26 current viewers. No chat function, no user list, no indication of what I was about to watch. At exactly 2 a.m., the screen changed. The video showed an ordinary bedroom, unmade bed, dresser with cluttered surface, clothes draped over a chair. Nothing unusual or particularly interesting. The camera angle suggested it was positioned high in one corner of the room, like a security camera. For several minutes, Nothing happened. The room remained empty, the only movement coming from a ceiling fan spinning slowly overhead. Just as my attention began to wander, a person entered the frame. They moved normally, unaware of being observed, performing routine actions, checking their phone, sorting through items on the dresser, sitting on the edge of the bed. The mundanity was almost disappointing after the elaborate security measures required to access the stream. A small panel appeared beside the video, displaying what seemed to be biometric data: heart rate, respiration, body temperature, though I couldn't tell if it was from the subject or aggregated from viewers. Below this panel was a series of options labeled ambient adjustments, with controls for room temperature, lighting, and sound systems. At the 20-minute mark, a notification appeared. Observation phase complete. Interaction phase authorized for premium viewers. The ambient controls became active, no longer grayed out. In the viewer count, several numbers changed from white to green, presumably indicating premium status. Almost immediately, the room's lighting dimmed slightly. The person in the frame looked up, momentarily confused by the change. Over the next 10 minutes, I watched as various ambient adjustments were implemented. The temperature display showed a drop of several degrees. A faint sound began playing through what must have been hidden speakers in the room. The subject's confusion turned to visible unease. They checked their phone, examined the air vent, looked around for the source of the sound. A new option appeared for premium viewers: proximity alert. Seconds after this became active, a noise came from somewhere outside the camera's view, perhaps the hallway or another room. The subject's heart rate, displayed in the data panel, increased significantly. They moved to the bedroom door, listened for a moment, then closed and locked it. The escalation continued gradually. More ambient adjustments, more unexplained sounds, each causing increased distress visible in both the subject's behavior and the biometric data. The person tried calling someone on their phone, but the call appeared not to connect. They checked the windows, confirmed the door lock, searched the room as if looking for an explanation for the strange occurrences. Throughout all of this, I remained a passive observer. My viewer status showed as basic/first time, with all interactive elements unavailable to me. I could only watch as others manipulated the environment, steadily increasing the subject's anxiety. There was something disturbingly methodical about the process, like a scientific protocol rather than random harassment. At the 1-hour mark, a final notification appeared. Culmination phase authorized for executive viewers only. The viewer numbers shifted again, most green numbers returning to white, leaving only 3 in green. A new set of controls appeared, though I couldn't see what options they contained from my access level. What happened next occurred so smoothly it seemed rehearsed, though the subject's genuine terror suggested otherwise. A barely perceptible gas began filling the room, visible only as slight distortion in the air. The subject noticed it too late, first becoming disoriented, then struggling to remain conscious. Before losing awareness completely, they managed to reach the door, finding it somehow impossible to unlock despite their earlier precautions. The biometric display showed decreasing heart rate and respiration as the subject collapsed near the door. The stream continued for another 30 minutes, showing the empty room and the unconscious person. A cursor occasionally appeared on screen as someone adjusted the camera angle for better views. The 3 executive viewers remained connected throughout. At the 2-hour mark, 2 figures entered the room wearing simple hazmat-style protection. They efficiently moved the unconscious subject onto a stretcher and out of the camera's view. One returned momentarily to straighten the room, removing any evidence of disturbance before the stream finally ended. A message appeared on my screen. Observation complete. Your viewing patterns have been analyzed. Premium access recommendations will be provided based on your engagement metrics. I sat in stunned silence, trying to process what I had witnessed. Had I just watched a real person being abducted? Was this an elaborate performance with paid actors? The production seemed too sophisticated for amateur staging, but too risky to be an actual crime broadcast live. I closed the browser and shut down my computer, suddenly aware of how vulnerable my own apartment felt. The next morning, I convinced myself it had been staged, an immersive theater experience designed to seem authentic. The alternative was too disturbing to contemplate. I decided not to access the observatory again, regardless of any premium recommendations I might receive. 3 days later, an email arrived in my personal account, an account I had never used when installing the specialized browser or communicating with Veritas Proxy. The subject line read, "Viewing analysis complete." The message contained a detailed assessment of my engagement patterns during the stream. Which moments had captured my attention longest, where my cursor had hovered on screen, even estimations of my emotional responses based on my viewing behavior. The analysis concluded that I fit the profile of an empathic observer, someone who experienced heightened engagement from witnessing genuine distress, but remained morally conflicted about it. The email ended with coordinates for another stream scheduled for the following night, this time requiring a cryptocurrency payment for access. I deleted the email immediately and ran security scans on all my devices. Finding nothing unusual, I still found myself checking my apartment for hidden cameras, suddenly aware of how my bedroom window faced another building, how my computer's webcam light could be disabled, how the smart devices in my home were always listening. A week passed without further contact. I began to relax, telling myself the entire experience had been nothing more than an elaborate scam targeting cryptocurrency from gullible viewers. Then a package arrived at my door. No shipping label, no indication of how it had been delivered. Inside was a small electronic device resembling a key fob, with a single button and tiny LED display, currently showing the number 37. No note accompanied the device, but I didn't need one to understand its purpose. I was being invited to move from observer to participant, from audience to contributor. The number 37 likely indicated currently connected viewers. The button, presumably, would activate something affecting someone else's environment. Someone currently sitting in their home, experiencing inexplicable events orchestrated by strangers they would never see. I considered reporting everything to authorities, but what evidence did I have? An anonymous website I could no longer access, an email I had deleted, a mysterious device with no identifying features, and my own participation as a willing observer of what might have been a serious crime. That was 2 weeks ago. I've since moved to a different apartment, changed my email addresses, replaced my electronic devices. The key fob device remains in a drawer, untouched. Sometimes at night, I check to see if the numbers changed. It has, increasing steadily from 37 to 63 as of yesterday. More observers joining the network. More participants receiving their own devices. More subjects being selected for immersive experiences. Last night, returning home late, I noticed a small red light blinking in the corner of my new bedroom, exactly where a security camera might be positioned for optimal coverage. When I investigated, I found nothing. No device, no explanation for the light I was certain I had seen. This morning, my laptop displayed a notification I never set up. Observation begins tonight, 2 a.m. Current viewer count, 26. I won't be in my apartment at 2 a.m. I won't be using any electronic devices, accessing any networks, or leaving any digital footprint that could be traced. But I can't escape the thought that somewhere, someone is adjusting their ambient controls, preparing their culmination protocols, waiting to transform another person's ordinary night into content for unseen observers. And I can't forget that I was one of those observers once, that my viewed became viewer metrics, that my engagement was measured and categorized, that my curiosity opened a door I now cannot seem to close. We think of horror as something external, something that happens to other people in distant places. We don't consider how our observation itself creates demand, how our attention forms the marketplace where others' fear becomes commodity. The real terror isn't what happens in those rooms. It's that somewhere right now, someone is watching, analyzing, anticipating your reactions, not to help or protect, but to measure how effectively your fear can entertain. I never wanted to share this story. Even now, as I type this out at 3 a.m. with my blinds drawn tight, I keep second-guessing myself. But after what happened last week, after seeing that familiar username pop up in my email, I realized I need to put this somewhere. Maybe as a warning. Maybe just to convince myself I'm not going mad. I've always been the tech guy in my friend group. The one people call when their laptop's acting up or when they need help setting up their new smart TV. It started back when I was 13, taking apart my dad's old computers in our garage in Manchester. My parents thought it was just a phase, but computers made sense to me in a way people never did. I was that quiet kid who'd rather debug code than go to parties. Not exactly the most exciting childhood, but it led me down some interesting paths. University was when things really took off. I studied computer science at Leeds, and while everyone else was out getting plastered at the student union, I'd be in my room exploring the furthest corners of the internet. It wasn't just about the coding challenges or the hacking forums, though those were fascinating enough. I was curious about what else was out there, beyond the surface web most people never venture past. That curiosity is what led me to the dark web in my second year. Looking back, I wish I could go back and slap some sense into my younger self. I thought I was being so clever, so edgy, setting up Tor, finding those first .onion links, feeling like I was some kind of digital explorer. It's embarrassing now, how proud I was of myself, like I'd discovered some secret club. I wasn't doing anything particularly dodgy at first, just browsing, looking at some marketplaces out of curiosity, reading forums where people discuss privacy and security. I remember telling myself that I was just there for academic reasons, to understand the full landscape of the internet. That's what we tell ourselves, isn't it? That we're just observers, not participants, that we can look without being touched by what we see. I'd been exploring for about 6 months when I came across a link on one of the forums. Someone had posted it with a cryptic message, for those with stronger stomachs than mine. No other context, no explanation. I should have left it alone. I knew even then that there were corners of the dark web no one should visit. But there was something about the way it was phrased, like a challenge. And I'd always had trouble walking away from a challenge. It was a Tuesday night in November. I remember because my flatmates had gone to see some horror film at the cinema. Ironic, considering what I was about to witness was far worse than any fictional horror. They'd invited me along, but I'd claimed I had coursework to finish. In reality, I just wanted a few hours alone to explore without anyone looking over my shoulder. My room was small, with just enough space for a bed and a desk crammed under the window. The streetlight outside cast an orange glow through the cheap blinds, making patterns on my keyboard as I clicked the link and waited for the page to load. Tor is notoriously slow, and I remember drumming my fingers, wondering if the link was dead. Maybe part of me was hoping it wouldn't load at all. When it finally did, it looked underwhelming at first. A black background, a simple login page with no graphics or explanations. Just a username and password field, and below it, a button that said Observe. No option to register that I could see. I was about to close it when I noticed a small line of text at the bottom. Guests welcome for preview only. I hesitated. Every instinct was telling me to close the browser and forget I'd ever seen this page. But that damn curiosity, it's like an itch you can't help scratching, even when you know it'll make things worse. I moved my cursor to the Observe button and clicked. The screen went black for a moment, then loaded what looked like a streaming video. The quality was poor, grainy, and with a slight delay, like CCTV footage. It showed a room, empty, except for a metal table in the center. The walls were concrete, and there was a drain in the floor. My first thought was that it was some kind of industrial space, maybe an abandoned building. Then I noticed the tools arranged neatly on a tray beside the table. Scalpels, pliers, things I couldn't even identify. My stomach dropped. I knew I should close the browser immediately, but I was frozen, hoping this was just some elaborate setup for a prank or a very convincing piece of performance art. That's when I noticed the chat window on the right side of the screen. Messages scrolling by too quickly to read properly. Anonymous users I didn't recognize, typing in a mix of languages. I caught fragments in English asking when it would start, commenting on previous sessions, preparing requests for what would happen next. It reminded me of those live gaming streams my flatmate would watch, except there was something soulless and predatory about the way these messages moved, like digital vultures circling. I felt sick. This couldn't be real. It had to be some kind of hoax, a shocking display put on to scare people or to scam them out of money. I remember adjusting my position in my chair. The cheap foam cushion had gone flat after too many all-night coding sessions. My neck was stiff. I always got tense when I was anxious, a habit since childhood that my mum used to point out. But then a door opened on screen, and two figures entered the room. One was wearing a plain white mask that covered their entire face, dressed in what looked like surgical scrubs. The other, God, I still see them in my nightmares, was a young man, maybe in his 20s, with tape over his mouth and his hands bound behind his back. His eyes were wild with terror as he was forced onto the table. I should have closed the browser then. I should have reported it to someone, though I had no idea who would have jurisdiction over something like this. Instead, I sat there, telling myself it couldn't be real, even as the chat window exploded with activity. Users were placing what looked like bids, specifying what they wanted to see done. The messages contained horrific requests, starting with extremities, avoiding facial damage initially, grotesque suggestions about the victim's eyes. My throat went dry as I read them. I remember my hand hovering over the trackpad, trembling slightly. The heating in my room had kicked on. That familiar clicking sound as the radiator warmed up. Such a normal, everyday sound that felt completely at odds with the horror unfolding on my screen. I felt like I was going to be sick. This couldn't be happening. Not in real life. Not with me watching. I told myself it was an elaborate fake, that the person on the table was an actor, that the blood that began to flow when the masked figure made the first cut wasn't real. But deep down, I knew. The screams that came through my headphones weren't acted. The terror in that young man's eyes wasn't performed. I finally snapped out of my horrified trance and slammed my laptop shut. I ran to the bathroom and vomited until there was nothing left. When I came back, shaking, I opened my computer again, not to watch, but to figure out how to report what I'd seen. But the page was gone, redirecting to an error message. I tried the link again, but it was dead. For days afterwards, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that room, that table, those tools. I told myself there was nothing I could have done. I had no way of knowing where it was happening. No way to identify the people involved. I tried to convince myself it might have been fake after all. People can do amazing things with special effects these days, right? But I knew the truth. I'd seen something real, something horrific, and I'd done nothing but watch. I nearly dropped out of university. I stopped going to lectures, stopped talking to friends. My flatmates thought I was having some kind of breakdown, which I suppose I was. I formatted my hard drive and reinstalled everything, paranoid that somehow I'd been tracked, that whoever ran that site knew who I was and what I'd seen. After a few months, I started to recover. I told myself it was a one-time mistake, that I'd never go near the dark web again. I focused on finishing my degree, got a job at a cybersecurity firm in London, built a normal life. I almost managed to convince myself that night had been some kind of fever dream, until last week. I was working late, alone in my flat. These days, I keep normal hours, have a girlfriend, go to the pub with colleagues, all the things normal people do. But sometimes I still stay up too late, coding or gaming or just browsing Reddit. It was around 1 a.m. when the email arrived. It came to my personal account, not the one I use for work. The subject line was just a string of numbers. The sender's address was a jumble of letters and digits that didn't look like any standard email format. I should have deleted it as spam, but something made me open it. There was no message, just a link, and below it, a single line stating they'd missed me, followed by an observer number I'd never seen before. I'd never used that identifier anywhere. It wasn't something I'd created or chosen, but as soon as I saw it, I knew. It was what they'd called me on that site. It was the automatic observer ID assigned to me when I'd clicked that button. I remember the room suddenly feeling colder, like someone had left a window open in December. My ears started to ring slightly, that same feeling I'd get before a panic attack during my university finals. I should have called someone, maybe my friend David, who works in digital security, but something kept me frozen in place. They knew who I was. They'd known all along. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely move the mouse, but I managed to delete the email. I shut down my computer, unplugged it from the wall. Childish, perhaps, but it was all I could think to do. I spent the rest of the night pacing my flat, jumping at every sound, checking the locks on my door and windows over and over. The next day, another email arrived, this time on my work account. Same subject line, same sender. I deleted it without opening it, then spent the day looking over my shoulder, convinced I was being watched. I kept checking my reflection in my monitor screen, half expecting to see someone standing behind me. The office felt different somehow. Spaces I'd walked through 1,000 times suddenly seemed threatening, filled with shadows and blind corners. The walk to the bathroom felt like crossing a minefield. When I got home, there was a third email waiting. On an old university account I hardly ever check anymore. This one had a message telling me it was my last chance, mentioning they had something special planned just for me. I didn't go to work the next day, or the day after that. I called in sick, turned off my phone, disconnected my router. I told myself I was being paranoid, that it was probably just some sick joke, someone who'd hacked my accounts. But then the letter arrived, an actual physical letter delivered to my flat. No return address. Inside, a single sheet of paper with an address printed on it. An address less than a mile from where I live. And a time, tonight, 11 p.m. I've spent the day trying to figure out what to do. Go to the police and tell them what, exactly? That years ago I watched something terrible on the dark web, and now I'm getting creepy emails. I have no proof, no evidence of any crime. Just my word, and the terrible feeling that somehow I've been marked. The rational part of my brain says to ignore it, to stay home, lock the doors, maybe go stay with a friend for a few days, until this blows over. But there's another part, the part that couldn't resist clicking that link all those years ago, that wonders. What if there's another victim? What if by going, I could somehow stop what happened before from happening again? Or what if it's a trap? What if I'm meant to be the next person on that table? It's 10:30 p.m. now. I have 30 minutes to decide. I keep telling myself I won't go, that only a madman would walk knowingly into what could be his own murder. But I also know that if I don't, I'll spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, waiting for them to find me again. I've written this all down as a record, I suppose. If something happens to me, maybe someone will find it. Maybe they'll understand. Or maybe I'm just scaring myself over nothing. And tomorrow I'll read this back and laugh at how paranoid I've become. It's funny how the mind works. Last night I was worried about paying my council tax on time. And now here I am writing what might be my last words. The ordinary and the horrific side by side. I just remembered I was supposed to call my mum tomorrow for her birthday. I should have visited more often. There's a knock at my door. It's too early. It's only 10:33. No one should be here. I'm not expecting anyone. The knocking is getting louder, more insistent. I can hear voices outside, whispering. The letterbox just flapped open. Something's been pushed through, a white envelope, just like the one that came this morning. I don't want to open it. I don't want to know what's inside. But I also know I don't have a choice anymore. They found me. And judging by what I can see through my peephole, 3 figures in white masks waiting patiently. They're not planning to leave until they get what they came for. I'm going to stop writing now. I need to think about what to do next. If anyone reads this, well, I'm not sure what I expect you to do. Just know that there are corners of the internet where real nightmares live. And sometimes, when you look into the darkness looks back and remembers your face.